suspected of leading the Blood Family Mafia street gang even while on the run.
Wherever he is, he seems to be pulling the strings on a lot of things.
He was Canada's most wanted man and the Hells Angels' worst nightmare. Dave Pick Turmel didn't just break the rules of Quebec's underworld, he shattered them. Leading the Blood Family Mafia, he sparked a bloody turf war that left bodies dismembered, rivals tortured, and authorities scrambling. While the Angels controlled everything, Turmel feared nothing. Then suddenly, he vanished overseas, but kept texting orders from abroad. How did this ghost outplay North America's most feared biker gang? Young and fearless.
A sweeping police crackdown on organized crime in Quebec has led to more than 30 arrests in the last week, and more are expected. Authorities say it's a blow to the Blood Family Mafia.
Dave Pick Turmel wasn't just another player in Quebec's crime scene. He was an anomaly that terrified even the most hardened criminals. Born in the late 90s with no father figure and raised in Quebec City's roughest neighborhoods, Turmel displayed an unsettling comfort with violence from his early teens. By 17, he was already orchestrating sophisticated drug operations while his classmates worried about prom dates. Police records describe a teenager who carried himself with the calculated menace of someone twice his age. One detective who tracked Turmel's early crimes noted in an internal report, "The level of violence displayed suggests either severe psychological issues or a strategic understanding of terror as a business model. Either possibility is deeply concerning." What made Turmel truly dangerous wasn't just his willingness to hurt people, it was his intelligence. While other young criminals bragged about their exploits on social media, Turmel operated with military-grade operational security. No photos, no social media footprint, not even a driver's license registered to his legal name. By 21, he had assembled a core group of equally disciplined lieutenants, forming what would later become the Blood Family Mafia. What made Dave Turmel truly exceptional wasn't just his brutality, it was achieving so much so young. By his early 20s, he had already mapped out a strategy to challenge Quebec's most feared criminal organization, a plan most veteran criminals would consider suicidal. His youth became a tactical advantage. While Angels leadership held meetings in known locations following established security protocols, Turmel's crew operated like digital nomads, gathering in random Airbnbs, communicating through gaming platforms, and leaving no predictable patterns. They moved with the fluid adaptability of youth rather than the calculated caution of experience. Former associates describe a leader with unnerving focus. One recalled, "Pick wasn't interested in the usual stuff, fancy cars, nightclubs, showing off. He lived like a ghost before he ever needed to run. Sometimes he'd disappear for days, then return with detailed plans for hitting Angels' territory. He was planning the war before anyone knew it was coming." This youthful fearlessness extended to his inner circle, most under 30, many with technical skills rather than traditional criminal backgrounds. They approached organized crime like a disruptive startup rather than a traditional hierarchy. While this made them reckless at times, it also made them unpredictable opponents in a world where predictability often means vulnerability. Perhaps most significantly, Turmel's youth allowed him to connect with a generation of street-level operators who felt excluded from traditional criminal advancement paths. He offered them immediate opportunity rather than years of paying dues, creating fierce loyalty among young criminals who might otherwise have remained isolated independents. At 25, Turmel was already controlling drug distribution across Quebec City's southern neighborhoods without a single arrest on his record. His organization recruited exclusively from disillusioned youth, teenagers and young adults who felt the established crime families and biker gangs had left them behind. When he turned 27, Turmel made a decision that transformed him from a successful drug dealer into Canada's most wanted man. While other criminals his age were still working their way up traditional criminal hierarchies, Turmel was preparing to challenge the most established force in Canadian organized crime. And he wasn't just willing to fight the Hells Angels, he was ready to break their most sacred rule. Broke the cardinal rule.
Canada's most wanted criminal, Dave Pic Turmel, has been arrested in Italy. Police say Turmel is the alleged leader of the Blood Family Mafia, a street gang that has been involved in brutal drug turf wars throughout the province of Quebec. He's been wanted since July 2023 by Quebec City Police for various charges, including conspiracy, armed assault, and drug trafficking. And Interpol has even issued a red notice for his arrest to all international law enforcement if he ever resurfaced. And police sources have confirmed to Radio-Canada that he was arrested in Rome. And although we don't have any more information about his current whereabouts, Canada does have an extradition treaty in place with Italy. In December, Turmel was named Canada's most wanted by the BOLO program. This stands for Be on the Lookout. And this program works alongside the RCMP and other Canadian police forces to alert the public about dangerous criminals. And at the time, police also issued a $250,000 reward for any information that could lead authorities to his whereabouts and ultimately his arrest.
In February 2023, Dave Turmel committed what amounted to criminal suicide in Quebec's underworld. He stopped paying the Hells Angels street tax. For decades, this non-negotiable 10% cut on all criminal activity had been the cornerstone of the Angels' power across Quebec. Everyone paid, from small-time weed dealers to major trafficking operations. Everyone except Turmel. The significance of this move cannot be overstated. Since the bloody Quebec biker war of the 1990s, the Hells Angels had maintained near absolute control over organized crime in the province. Their dominance was so complete that most criminals simply accepted the tax as an unavoidable cost of doing business. The Angels had killed for far less than what Turmel was attempting. Word reached the Hells Angels leadership within days. According to law enforcement sources, the Angels initially assumed it was a misunderstanding. That someone so young would deliberately provoke them seemed inconceivable. A mid-level Angel was dispatched to explain the mistake to Turmel. That enforcer disappeared. No body was ever found. For the next week, silence. Then an SUV connected to a Hells Angels stash house exploded in a meticulously planned detonation. No casualties, just a message. Turmel wasn't just refusing to pay, he was declaring war. In the unwritten constitution of Quebec's underworld, one law stood above all others. You pay the Hells Angels their tax. This wasn't just a business arrangement, it was the foundational principle upon which decades of criminal stability had been built. Every dealer, every smuggler, every criminal enterprise operating in Angels territory contributed their 10%. Those who refused disappeared quickly and permanently. Until Dave Turmel. February 2023 was when everything changed, recalled a street-level dealer who witnessed the aftermath. No announcement, no negotiation. Pic just gathered his lieutenants and told them payments to the Angels were stopping immediately. When someone asked what would happen when they came for their money, he just smiled and said, "Let them try." The audacity of this move cannot be overstated. Since the bloody Quebec biker war of the 1990s that left over 160 people dead, the Hells Angels' dominance had been absolute. Their tax wasn't just revenue, it was symbolic recognition of their supremacy. By refusing to pay, Turmel wasn't just withholding money. He was rejecting the entire power structure of Quebec's criminal hierarchy. It would be like a small business suddenly announcing they won't pay taxes to the government anymore, explained a former organized crime prosecutor. Except the government doesn't dismember people for non-compliance. The Angels did. Everyone knew this. Turmel knew this. That's what made his stand so shocking. The Angels' initial reaction was disbelief. According to intelligence sources, they assumed it was a misunderstanding, that someone so young couldn't possibly be deliberately provoking them. They sent an enforcer to clarify the situation with Turmel. That enforcer vanished. No body was ever found. Days later, an SUV connected to a Hells Angels stash house exploded in a controlled detonation. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't confusion or oversight. It was declaration of war. What made Turmel's stand truly revolutionary wasn't just refusing the tax, noted a criminal intelligence analyst. It was that he had clearly prepared extensively for the inevitable retaliation. Most criminals who challenged the Angels did so impulsively and paid with their lives. Turmel had spent months hardening his operations, securing supply chains, and training his people for conflict. This cascading effect, Other criminals, inspired by Termel's example, created an existential threat to the Angels' business model. Their entire power structure depended on universal acknowledgement of their authority, symbolized by that 10% tax. Every week, Termel operated without paying. Their aura of invincibility diminished. The Angels faced an impossible choice: unleash a bloody public war that would bring massive police attention, or attempt negotiation, something they'd rarely done in their history. Their hesitation became another victory for Termel, whose brutal tactics would soon escalate the conflict beyond anything Quebec had seen in decades. The Angels faced an impossible choice: crush this upstart quickly and risk a messy public war, or attempt negotiations, something they'd rarely done in their history. Their hesitation proved costly. Within weeks, other dealers began questioning why they were still paying the Angels' tax when Termel's crew wasn't. But challenging the Angels was only the beginning. To survive what was coming, Termel needed to instill a level of fear that would make even the most hardened bikers think twice before striking back. That required tactics Quebec's criminal underworld had never seen before, brutality that would shock even those accustomed to violence. Brutal tactics.
CTV's Quebec Bureau Chief Geneviève Beauchemin now on the list and the rewards being offered. Jen.
Well, Sandy, the top 2 wanted men are at the heart of a violent conflict here in Quebec, but they could be anywhere.
The violence that followed Termel's declaration of independence wasn't just criminal, it was psychological warfare. While the Hells Angels had long relied on intimidation, they typically adhered to certain unwritten rules. Bodies were disposed of discreetly, civilians were generally left alone. Their first major statement came when a mid-level Hells Angels associate was found in a downtown Quebec City parking garage. He hadn't just been killed, he'd been methodically tortured, with burn marks covering his feet and his ears removed. A video of the torture session circulated briefly on encrypted messaging apps before vanishing, just long enough to ensure every criminal in Quebec heard about it. The BFM didn't just kill their enemies, they turned them into messages, explained a forensic psychologist who consulted with authorities. They borrowed tactics from Central American gangs like MS-13 and Mexican cartels, waterboarding, dismemberment, filmed executions, but with a calculated precision that suggested these weren't rage killings. They were marketing. What truly distinguished Termel's approach was the theatrical element. Bodies weren't hidden, they were displayed. In one particularly gruesome incident, a teenage BFM associate who had allegedly betrayed the organization was found dismembered outside a Hells Angels clubhouse in Beauce, plastic wrapped like a macabre gift. The message was unmistakable: cross us, and this happens. Law enforcement officials were stunned by the escalation. We'd seen violence between rival gangs before, said one investigator, but nothing this systematic or ritualistic. It wasn't just about killing enemies, it was about creating terror. And it was working. Perhaps most disturbing was how Termel maintained operational discipline despite the extreme violence. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses willing to talk. The BFM operated with a level of security that suggested military or intelligence training, using encrypted communications, rotating safe houses, and counter-surveillance techniques that baffled authorities. The violence that followed Termel's declaration against the Hells Angels wasn't just criminal, it was psychological warfare. While Quebec had seen its share of gang violence over the decades, Termel's Blood Family Mafia introduced methods so extreme they shocked even veteran criminals and police investigators who thought they'd seen everything. The BFM didn't just kill, they created spectacles of suffering, explained a forensic psychologist who consulted on several BFM-linked homicides. They borrowed techniques from Central American cartels and combined them with a theatrical presentation that transformed violence from mere enforcement into psychological terror. Their signature approach became evident in spring 2023 when a mid-level Hells Angels associate was found in a downtown Quebec City parking garage. He hadn't been simply executed, he'd been methodically tortured over what medical examiners estimated was a 6 to 8 hour period. Burns covered his feet, his ears had been removed, and the medical examiner noted evidence of waterboarding. Most disturbing was the clinical precision. These weren't rage-driven injuries, but methodical, almost surgical torture. What distinguished BFM violence was its calculated nature, said a veteran homicide detective. Traditional gang killings are often spontaneous, emotional. These were different, staged, choreographed, designed specifically to maximize terror in whoever discovered the bodies or heard about them later. By mid-2023, a pattern had emerged in BFM operations. Victims weren't just killed, they were dismembered, burned, mutilated in ways specifically chosen to spread fear throughout criminal networks. Bodies weren't hidden, but displayed in locations guaranteed to be discovered. Outside rival clubhouses, in the trunks of cars parked at popular restaurants, or even in public spaces with minimal attempt at concealment. One particularly notorious incident involved a teenage dealer who had allegedly provided information to the Angels. His remains were found outside a Hells Angels clubhouse in Bose, dismembered, each part meticulously wrapped in plastic like a grotesque gift. A card attached reportedly read simply, "No cooperation with dinosaurs." Law enforcement noted the psychological sophistication behind these displays. The BFM understood something fundamental about fear, explained a criminal psychologist. It's not just about what happens to you, it's about what might happen. Each body they left told a story of prolonged suffering, of helplessness. The message was clear: cross us, and your death won't be quick. The escalation continued throughout 2023, with each incident seemingly calibrated to push psychological boundaries further. Victims showed evidence of increasingly elaborate torture methods, techniques that required research, specialized tools, and most disturbingly, patience. This wasn't impulsive violence, but planned, rehearsed brutality designed for maximum impact. What made their approach particularly effective was the unpredictability, noted a Quebec provincial police intelligence officer. Sometimes they'd leave bodies in public places. Sometimes they'd return victims, still alive but horrifically injured, to their homes. Sometimes they'd send photos of captives to their families or associates. There was no pattern to predict, which amplified the terror. By mid-2023, the pattern was clear. Anyone who cooperated with the Hells Angels against Turmel's organization wouldn't just die. They would suffer in ways designed to maximize fear throughout the criminal ecosystem. The psychological impact was profound. Even hardened criminals began avoiding involvement in the conflict, creating a buffer zone around BFM territory that even the Angels hesitated to breach. Then, as pressure from both law enforcement and the Hells Angels intensified, Turmel made his most surprising move yet. He disappeared overseas, leaving Quebec's underworld wondering who was truly in control. But his physical absence didn't mean he had relinquished command. Operated from exile.
With life-sized cutouts of their suspects in the background, authorities listed their fugitives.
In July 2023, as the Quebec Provincial Police issued public arrest warrants for Dave Turmel and his second-in-command Rubens Dennis, both men had already vanished without a trace. What investigators initially assumed was a temporary hideout strategy soon revealed itself as something far more sophisticated. Turmel hadn't just fled, he had established an international command center. Most fugitives either go completely dark or make mistakes trying to maintain control from afar, explained a cybercrime specialist who worked the case. Turmel somehow managed to continue directing operations with military-grade precision while constantly moving across continents. Cell phone data would later reveal an astonishing pattern of movement. Portugal, Morocco, Greece, Spain, and eventually Italy. At no point did Turmel use his real identity or established financial channels. He moved like a ghost, using a network of forged documents, cryptocurrency transactions, and burner phones that frustrated international law enforcement at every turn. More impressive than his evasion techniques was Turmel's continued operational control. Blood family mafia activities didn't slow during his absence, they expanded. Attacks on Hells Angels properties continued with precise timing. Drug shipments arrived on schedule. Money flowed through increasingly complex laundering operations, all orchestrated by a man who officially didn't exist anywhere. He was texting operational orders from across the Atlantic, and his people were executing them within hours, said a former RCMP intelligence officer. We intercepted fragments of communications showing he was micromanaging details down to specific street corners where deals would happen. It wasn't just broad directives, it was hands-on leadership from thousands of miles away. This remote command structure represented an evolution in organized crime that worried authorities. Traditional criminal organizations relied on physical presence and personal relationships. Termel had created something different, a decentralized network that could function across borders with minimal direct contact, using encrypted technologies and disciplined cell structures that resembled terrorist organizations more than traditional gangs. The February 2024 coordinated raids across Quebec demonstrated the challenge. While authorities successfully arrested 18 BFM members and seized significant evidence, Termel's core leadership remained intact and operations resumed within weeks. It wasn't until Rubens Dennis was captured in Lisbon that investigators began to understand the scope of what they were facing, finding in his possession notebooks referencing drop zones across multiple European countries. Even as the net tightened, Termel maintained his operational rhythm. Some speculate he could have remained hidden indefinitely had it not been for an apparent betrayal from within his own organization. Someone lured by the $250,000 reward or seeking immunity provided coordinates leading to his Roman villa. What transformed Dave Termel from a local gangster into a criminal legend was his unprecedented ability to maintain iron-fisted control over his organization while living as an international fugitive. When he vanished from Quebec in July 2023, most experts predicted the Blood Family Mafia would quickly fracture without its leader's physical presence. Instead, something remarkable happened. The organization not only survived, but thrived under his remote command. Most criminal organizations are built around personal relationships and face-to-face intimidation, explained a former RCMP intelligence analyst. They collapse without the physical presence of leadership. Termel created something different, a criminal enterprise that functioned like a modern tech company, with secure digital communications, decentralized operations, and leadership that could work from anywhere. From his constantly shifting locations across Portugal, Morocco, Greece, and eventually Italy, Termel maintained operational control through an elaborate system of encrypted communications. Intelligence gathered after his capture revealed he used a rotation of burner phones, specialized encryption software, and a complex system of code words and proxies to transmit orders. He was texting operational commands from across the Atlantic, and his crew was executing them within hours, said a Quebec provincial police officer familiar with the investigation. We'd intercept fragments of communications showing he was micromanaging everything from territorial disputes to specific assassination targets. This wasn't general guidance, it was hands-on leadership from thousands of miles away. What made this remote control particularly effective was Termel's meticulous preparation. Before fleeing Canada, he had established a clear chain of command, with trusted lieutenants assigned specific responsibilities and territories. He created redundancy in his communication systems, ensuring that if one channel was compromised, others remained viable. Most importantly, he had instilled such fear and loyalty that his orders carried the same weight from 4,000 miles away as they would have in person. A former BFM associate who later entered witness protection described the process. Pick might be physically gone, but we felt his presence constantly. Messages would arrive with precise instructions, which corners to take over, which angels associate to target next, how to respond to police pressure. Disobeying wasn't an option, even with him overseas. Everyone knew he was watching, that he had eyes everywhere. This remote command capability represented a disturbing evolution in organized crime. Traditional criminal organizations were inherently limited by geography. Their influence diminished with distance. Termel demonstrated that in the digital age, a criminal leader could project power globally while remaining physically untraceable. He essentially created a criminal cloud service, noted a cybercrime specialist. His physical location became irrelevant. His digital presence was what mattered, and that presence extended wherever his communications could reach. This is the future of organized crime, borderless, digitally native, and incredibly difficult to disrupt through traditional enforcement methods. The February 2024 coordinated raids across Quebec highlighted this challenge. While authorities successfully arrested 18 BFM members and seized significant assets, the organization's core infrastructure remained intact. Within weeks, operations had resumed under Termel's continued remote direction. It wasn't until the capture of his second-in-command, Rubens Dennis, in Lisbon, that investigators began to understand the scope of his international command network. Even as the net tightened around him, Termel maintained his operational rhythm. Some speculate he could have continued indefinitely had it not been for an apparent betrayal from within his organization. Someone lured by the $250,000 reward or seeking immunity who provided coordinates leading to his Roman villa. When Italian authorities finally entered that villa in March 2025, they found Termel calmly waiting, barefoot in the hallway. Inside were the tools of his remote empire: forged passports, burner phones, encrypted USB drives, and handwritten codebooks mapping out operations across multiple continents. He had been living comfortably while orchestrating chaos from afar. His time in exile had achieved something remarkable. It had transformed the Blood family mafia from a local challenge into an international concern. More importantly, it had done lasting damage to the Hells Angels' reputation as the untouchable force in Canadian organized crime. Damaged Hells Angels' reputation.
30 of its files have led to arrests. Investigators say catching up to criminals is a community effort.
For nearly 3 decades following the Quebec Biker War, the Hells Angels had maintained an aura of invincibility across the province. Their dominance was so complete that most criminals simply accepted their authority without question. The 10% street tax was paid promptly, territorial disputes were settled by Angels' decree, and open challenges to their authority were virtually unheard of. Then came Dave Termel. What Termel did wasn't just challenge the Angels financially, he humiliated them publicly, explained a former prosecutor who specialized in organized crime cases. Every time a BFM attack went unanswered, every time Termel's people took over another corner or flipped another dealer without immediate retaliation, the Angels' mystique eroded. The damage was particularly acute for the Quebec City chapter, which had long presented itself as the province's most disciplined and fearsome organization. As days turned to weeks and then months without a decisive response to Termel's provocations, whispers began circulating throughout the criminal ecosystem. Perhaps the Angels weren't as powerful as everyone thought. A turning point came in late 2023 when several low-level drug dealers who had traditionally operated under Angels' protection began switching allegiance to the Blood family mafia. The flow of defectors started as a trickle, but grew steadily as Termel's organization demonstrated it could both protect its people and punish enemies more effectively than the established power structure. The Angels had always sold themselves as the ultimate protection, said a street-level informant. "Pay us and we'll keep you safe." But when people saw the BFM torturing and killing Angels' associates while the organization struggled to respond, that protection suddenly seemed a lot less valuable. Perhaps most damaging was the Angels' uncharacteristic willingness to negotiate. Multiple intelligence sources confirmed that by early 2024, representatives of the Hells Angels had made back-channel attempts to reach a territorial compromise with Termel's organization, something previously unimaginable. The mere fact that they were willing to negotiate rather than wage all-out war represented a stunning loss of face. For younger criminals coming up in the system, the calculus changed, noted a police intelligence analyst. The Angels had always recruited by projecting an image of absolute power. Now there was an alternative model, younger, more tech-savvy, willing to use extreme violence, and apparently capable of outmaneuvering the old guard. By the time Termel was captured in Italy, the damage to the Hells Angels' reputation was substantial and possibly permanent. Though they quickly moved to reclaim territories after the BFM leadership arrests, their mystique had been punctured. Other criminal organizations began testing boundaries, questioning tribute payments, and eyeing opportunities in markets previously considered untouchable. What began as one man's audacious refusal to pay a tax had evolved into a fundamental reshaping of Quebec's criminal landscape. And even with Termel sitting in an Italian prison, the questions he raised continue to echo. If the mighty Hells Angels could be challenged so effectively by a young upstart with a different vision of criminal enterprise, what other changes might be coming to the underworld's established order started a movement.
C'est ce qui me permet aujourd'hui de vous confirmer que c'est bel et bien Dave Turmel qui a été arrêté en Italie.
C'est un point de presse qui était attendu de la part du chef de police du SPVQ qui a confirmé cet après-midi.
Dave Turmel didn't just challenge the Hells Angels, he sparked a revolution in Quebec's criminal underworld that continues to ripple through Canadian organized crime. What began as one man's refusal to pay taxes evolved into something much larger, a fundamental questioning of the old order that had governed illicit markets for decades. By late 2023, it wasn't just Turmel's blood family mafia refusing to pay, explained a Quebec provincial police intelligence analyst. Small crews across Montreal, Trois-Rivières, and even parts of Ontario were quietly testing the boundaries. They watched what happened to Turmel's organization and thought, if they can do it, why can't we? This wasn't just about money. The 10% tax the Hells Angels imposed had always been as much about respect and acknowledgement of hierarchy as it was about revenue. By publicly refusing to pay, Turmel challenged the fundamental social contract of Canadian organized crime, the understanding that certain organizations sat atop the pyramid and everyone else operated with their blessing. A former street dealer who switched allegiance to the BFM described the shift. It was like someone finally said what everyone was thinking. These old bikers sitting in their clubhouses, getting fat off our work while we took all the risks. Pick showed there was another way. What made Turmel's movement particularly potent was its appeal to younger criminals. While established crime families and biker gangs relied on tradition and reputation, the Blood Family Mafia offered something different: meritocracy and modernity. They embraced cryptocurrency, used sophisticated encryption, and operated with a corporate efficiency that made the old guard look antiquated by comparison. Turmel created a narrative that resonated, said a criminology professor who studies gang recruitment. He positioned the BFM as the future and the Angels as the past. For young people entering the life, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds who felt excluded from traditional criminal hierarchies, that message was incredibly powerful. By early 2024, authorities identified at least 7 distinct criminal groups across Quebec that had adopted BFM-style tactics and organizational structures. These weren't direct affiliates, they were imitators, inspired by Turmel's model. They operated in smaller cells, maintained strict operational security, embraced digital technologies, and most importantly, rejected the traditional tribute systems. The movement's growth alarmed both law enforcement and established criminal organizations. Police resources were already stretched thin, tracking the original conflict between the BFM and Hells Angels. Now they faced multiple fronts as new groups emerged to fill power vacuums or challenge established territories. Perhaps most concerning for authorities was how Turmel's example had changed recruitment patterns. Traditionally, entry into organized crime followed predictable pathways: family connections, neighborhood affiliations, or apprenticeship under established figures. The BFM model bypassed these, allowing young criminals to form their own structures without permission from established powers. He democratized organized crime in a way we hadn't seen before, admitted one frustrated detective. Before Turmel, starting your own crew meant getting approval from someone higher up the chain. After him, kids realized they could just do it themselves if they were smart enough and brutal enough. Even with Turmel in custody, the movement he started continues to evolve. The ideology of independence he championed, that young criminals don't need to subordinate themselves to aging power structures, has taken root across Canada's criminal landscape. Some law enforcement officials privately worry that his capture may have transformed him from a criminal into a martyr, amplifying his influence rather than diminishing it. What makes the movement particularly resilient is that it isn't centralized around Turmel himself. It's based on his methods, his approach, his willingness to challenge convention, elements that can be replicated even without his direct leadership. And as his international manhunt demonstrated, the modern criminal doesn't need to be physically present to exert influence across borders and continents. International fugitive.
That is Quebec City Police Sunday morning confirming the criminal organization thereafter and the identity of the man running it. The blood
When Dave Turmel vanished from Quebec in July 2023, few expected him to remain free for long. Canadian authorities mobilized one of the largest manhunts in recent history, placing him atop the BOLO Top 25 Most Wanted list with a staggering $250,000 reward. His face was plastered across border checkpoints, airports, and police stations nationwide. Yet somehow, Turmel slipped through the net and transformed from a local criminal into an international phantom. What made Turmel different from other fugitives was his preparation, explained a retired RCMP officer familiar with the case. Most criminals run reactively when heat builds up. Turmel had clearly planned his exit strategy months, maybe years in advance. By the time we issued the warrants, he was already operating with completely new identities across multiple countries. The first confirmed sighting came from Portugal in late 2023. Surveillance footage captured a man matching Turmel's description entering a luxury apartment building in Lisbon. By the time local authorities raided the location, he had disappeared again, leaving behind only a wiped laptop and scattered SIM cards. The next trace emerged from Morocco, where border officials later identified passport documentation that had been used by Turmel under an alias. The pattern continued: Greece, Serbia, briefly the Netherlands, then reportedly through parts of North Africa before settling in Italy. Each appearance was brief, each identity disposable. He moved like someone with intelligence training, noted an Interpol coordinator, multiple parallel identities, never using the same route twice, avoiding digital footprints, and leveraging cryptocurrency to move money without traditional banking channels. We were always 2 steps behind. What baffled investigators most wasn't just Turmel's ability to evade capture, but his continued operational control over the Blood family mafia. Encrypted communications intercepted by authorities revealed he was still giving specific orders, approving major moves, and even directing retaliatory strikes against Hells Angels assets, all while moving across continents. The manhunt intensified in February 2024 when Canadian authorities executed coordinated raids across Quebec, arresting 18 BFM members. The hope was that someone would talk, providing information on Turmel's whereabouts in exchange for leniency. Instead, they encountered a wall of silence unprecedented in Canadian organized crime investigations. Not a single person cooperated, said a prosecutor involved in the case. We offered significant deals, reduced sentences, witness protection, new identities. They all refused. That level of loyalty or fear is extremely rare, especially when looking at serious prison time. The breakthrough finally came in February 2024 with the arrest of Rubens Dennis, Turmel's second-in-command, in Lisbon. While Dennis maintained his silence, the items recovered from his hotel room proved invaluable. A notebook containing coded references to locations across southern Europe, including specific districts in Rome. What followed was a carefully coordinated international operation involving Canadian authorities, Interpol, and Italian law enforcement. For weeks, they monitored potential locations, analyzed utility usage patterns, and deployed surveillance teams across Rome's outskirts. The endgame came through an unexpected channel, a cryptic message sent to a police contact in Quebec containing only coordinates and the phrase, "He's tired of moving." Whether this came from a disgruntled BFM insider or someone seeking the reward remains unknown, but the intelligence proved accurate. In the pre-dawn hours of March 27, 2025, Italian tactical units surrounded a private villa outside Rome. They expected resistance, perhaps even a firefight. Instead, they found Turmel standing calmly in a hallway, barefoot, seemingly expecting them. The man who had eluded international authorities for nearly 2 years surrendered without incident. Inside the villa, investigators discovered the infrastructure of Turmel's mobile command center. 6 burner phones, multiple SIM cards, forged documents from 4 countries, encrypted USB drives, and handwritten ledgers detailing operations across 2 continents. The technology was sophisticated, but what struck investigators most was the meticulous organization. Everything labeled, coded, and arranged with military precision. Turmel's capture made international headlines, but it also raised uncomfortable questions for law enforcement. How had someone so young, with no formal training in counterintelligence, managed to evade a multinational manhunt for so long? More concerning, what did it say about modern borders and identification systems that Termel had crossed through at least 7 countries undetected? As he awaits legal proceedings in Italy's high-security Regina Coeli prison, Termel's time as an international fugitive has only enhanced his mystique. For young criminals, his globe-trotting evasion of authorities represents something aspirational, proof that with the right preparation, even the most intense manhunt can be thwarted. That narrative is particularly powerful when contrasted with the aging leadership of traditional organizations like the Hells Angels, whose influence has historically been limited by geographical boundaries. Youth versus experience.
He was proud to be a Hells Angel, but he wanted more. He had a dream, the Hells Angels establishing themselves as Canada's only outlaw biker club. Sky, Pato's replacement, acknowledged Stadnik's effort and awarded him the Filthy Few patch, a high-status symbol that police believe the only way you could earn that patch is by killing for the club.
The conflict between Dave Termel's Blood Family Mafia and the Quebec Hells Angels wasn't just a territorial dispute, it was a generational war. On one side stood an organization with nearly 50 years of history, established protocols, and aging leadership. On the other, a crew whose founder and most lieutenants were under 30, unburdened by tradition and hungry to rewrite the rules. The average age in the Quebec Hells Angels leadership was around 60, explained a criminology researcher specializing in biker gangs. Many were veterans of the 1990s biker war. They had decades of criminal experience, established networks, and a proven playbook. But that experience came with blind spots, particularly around technology and changing social dynamics. Termel exploited these blind spots ruthlessly, while the Angels relied on traditional intelligence gathering through bar owners, strip club managers, and street informants. The BFM operated almost entirely through encrypted messaging apps, anonymous cryptocurrencies, and closed digital networks. They didn't hang out in known criminal haunts or socialize in predictable patterns. They moved like digital natives because that's exactly what they were. The Angels kept looking for Termel in places young people don't go anymore, said a former street-level dealer. They'd send guys to check nightclubs, pool halls, restaurants. Meanwhile, BFM was coordinating through gaming servers and encrypted chats, meeting in Airbnbs rented under fake names, and moving money through channels the old guys barely understood. This generational divide extended to recruitment and loyalty models. The Hells Angels operated on an apprenticeship system. Prospects spent years proving themselves before earning full membership. Termel's organization offered immediate opportunity based on skills and willingness to embrace extreme violence. For ambitious young criminals unwilling to wait years climbing traditional hierarchies, the appeal was obvious. A police intelligence report from early 2024 highlighted this contrast. BFM recruitment targets specifically focus on technical skills, encryption knowledge, social media manipulation, financial technology experience, areas traditional organizations have typically undervalued. Perhaps most significantly, the youth experience divide manifested in operational tempo. The Angels approached the conflict methodically, gathering intelligence before acting, weighing consequences, protecting established businesses. Termel's crew moved with the impatience of youth, striking quickly, accepting casualties as a cost of doing business, and prioritizing psychological impact over long-term stability. The Angels were playing chess, thinking 5 moves ahead, noted a veteran organized crime detective. Termel was playing speed chess, making 3 moves in the time it took them to make one. It wasn't always the optimal move, but the pace itself became a strategic advantage. This difference in pace repeatedly gave the BFM tactical advantages. When the Angels identified a BFM stash house and began planning a measured response, Termel's people had already relocated their assets and set up elsewhere. When Angels leadership gathered to discuss strategy, BFM was already executing the next provocation. The conflict also exposed a stark reality about violence tolerance across generations. Many Angels leaders, comfortable after decades of relative dominance, had developed businesses and lifestyles they were reluctant to jeopardize with high-profile violence. Termel's youth movement had no such reservations. They embraced extreme brutality precisely because it differentiated them, from the established order. The older generation had developed a certain pragmatism, explained a former prosecutor. They understood that excessive violence brings heat, disrupts business, creates problems. Termel's crew didn't care. They weaponized that difference, essentially betting that the Angels wouldn't match their brutality because they had too much to lose. That bet largely paid off. When the BFM dismembered victims or released torture videos, the Angels generally responded with more measured violence, drive-by shootings or disappearances rather than matching the theatrical cruelty. This restraint, while perhaps strategically sound, fed into the narrative that the old guard was weakening. As the conflict evolved, the generation gap became increasingly central to recruitment on both sides. Younger criminals increasingly viewed the Angels as outdated, overly cautious, and hierarchical. Meanwhile, established criminal figures gravitated toward the Angels' stability and business-focused approach. By the time of Termel's capture, the criminal landscape had effectively segregated along generational lines, creating parallel power structures that continue to compete for influence. And while experience provides countless advantages in criminal enterprises, Termel's youth movement demonstrated that in a rapidly changing world, adaptability and technological fluency can sometimes overcome decades of established practice. The generational warfare Termel initiated extended beyond tactics to fundamental questions about how modern criminal organizations should operate. Questions that would soon be answered in the most graphic way possible as the BFM elevated the conflict to unprecedented levels of public brutality. Released torture videos.
Oh, that didn't record none of that. Do it again.
Say it.
In the long history of Quebec's organized crime battles, certain lines had remained uncrossed. Violence was expected, even ritualized, but it typically occurred away from public view. Bodies might be found, but the acts that ended those lives remained mercifully private. Dave Termel's Blood Family Mafia shattered this unwritten rule with a psychological warfare campaign that shocked even hardened criminals and veteran investigators. "We'd seen gang violence before," said a Quebec provincial police detective who requested anonymity. "Shootings, bombings, disappearances, that's standard in turf wars. But what the BFM did with those videos wasn't just violence, it was performance art designed to terrorize." The first video appeared in October 2023 on encrypted messaging channels frequented by drug dealers and criminal associates. It showed a man identified as a Hells Angels affiliate being subjected to systematic torture, waterboarded, burned with heated metal, his fingers broken one by one while he pleaded for mercy. The video wasn't brief or edited for impact. It ran for nearly 40 excruciating minutes. Most disturbing was the clinical atmosphere. The perpetrators wore surgical masks and gloves. The room was plastic sheeted like a kill room from a television crime drama. There was no rage, no shouting, just methodical, almost business-like infliction of suffering. At the video's conclusion, the victim was executed with a single gunshot. The final frame showed his Hells Angels tattoo being cut from his body. This wasn't about extracting information, explained a forensic psychologist who consulted on the case. The victim clearly had nothing valuable to offer. This was about creating a digital artifact of terror, something that would circulate, be watched, create fear. The production value alone suggested extensive planning. Within days, the video had spread through criminal networks across Quebec. Law enforcement intercepted dozens of messages referring to it, with many expressing shock at the escalation. What made the strategy particularly effective was the selective distribution. The video wasn't posted publicly online, where it might trigger massive police response, but in closed channels, where it would reach its intended audience. Anyone considering working with or for the Hells Angels. A second video appeared in December 2023. This one featured two victims, allegedly low-level drug dealers who had refused to switch allegiance from the Angels to the BFM. The torture techniques escalated: burning feet, partial drowning, ear and finger amputation. Again, the clinical approach, the high production value, the deliberate pacing designed to maximize psychological impact. These weren't just killings, noted a criminal psychologist. They were advertisements, Each video communicated the same message. This is what happens when you side against us, and more importantly, the Hells Angels cannot protect you from this fate. Law enforcement struggled to respond effectively. The videos were distributed through encrypted channels that made tracking the source nearly impossible. Forensic analysis revealed nothing useful about the locations. The rooms were generic, devoid of identifying features. The perpetrators never showed their faces or spoke identifiable phrases. By early 2024, at least 4 such videos had circulated through Quebec's criminal underground. Their impact on the conflict was profound. Multiple intelligence sources reported that low and mid-level criminals were actively avoiding association with the Hells Angels, fearing they might become the next unwilling stars in the BFM's grotesque film series. The Angels had always sold protection as their primary product, explained a former organized crime prosecutor. Pay us, follow our rules, and we'll keep you safe. These videos systematically undermined that promise. If the Angels couldn't protect their own people from such public, humiliating ends, what exactly were dealers paying for? Perhaps most disturbing was how the videos influenced recruitment patterns. While many were repulsed by the brutality, others, particularly younger, aspiring criminals, were drawn to the perceived power and fearlessness the videos represented. The BFM began attracting a particular type of recruit, those who viewed extreme violence not as a necessary evil, but as a calling card. We started seeing copycats, admitted a Montreal police officer, not full videos, but similar torture methods showing up in other gang conflicts. Turmel essentially normalized a level of brutality we hadn't seen before in Canadian crime. He made it aspirational. The psychological impact extended to law enforcement and prosecution. Cases involving the BFM became increasingly difficult to build as witnesses refused to testify, fearing similar fates. Even with significant protection offers, the visual impact of those videos created a chilling effect that standard witness protection couldn't overcome. The videos represented a fundamental shift in how criminal organizations projected power. Traditional organizations like the Hells Angels relied on reputation and history. Everyone knew what might happen if you crossed them, but that knowledge remained largely abstract. Turmel's innovation was making the threat explicit, undeniable, and impossible to unsee. This strategic use of documented torture created such pressure on the Hells Angels that it forced them into a position few thought possible, sitting down to negotiate with the upstart who had so publicly challenged their authority. Forced Hells Angels to negotiate. For nearly 3 decades, the Quebec Hells Angels had maintained an almost religious doctrine. They don't negotiate with challengers. Rivals were eliminated, not accommodated. Territories were taken, not shared. This inflexibility had been central to their mystique and power. Dave Turmel didn't just challenge this doctrine, he shattered it, forcing North America's most notorious biker gang into the unthinkable position of offering compromise. The first approach came through intermediaries in late 2023, revealed a former intelligence officer who worked the case. A neutral third party, a veteran criminal with connections to both sides but aligned with neither, carried messages between BFM lieutenants and the Quebec City Hells Angels chapter. The very existence of these communications was unprecedented. The Angels' willingness to negotiate rather than escalate stemmed from a cold calculation. The traditional response to Turmel's provocations would have been all-out war, targeted assassinations, bombings, a show of overwhelming force. But several factors complicated this approach. First was the asymmetrical nature of the conflict. The Angels had substantial businesses, properties, and public-facing operations that made them vulnerable to both BFM attacks and the increased police scrutiny that would follow a major gang war. Turmel's organization, by contrast, operated almost entirely in the shadows, with minimal fixed assets and leadership already accustomed to living underground. The Angels had something to lose, explained a veteran organized crime detective. Clubhouses, legitimate businesses, comfortable lives built over decades. Turmel's people lived like guerrillas, moving constantly, minimal possessions, ready to disappear at a moment's notice. It's hard to intimidate someone who has already embraced that lifestyle. Second was the generational reality. Many senior Hells Angels members were in their 50s and 60s, less inclined towards street battles than in their youth, and more focused on maintaining their criminal enterprises with minimal disruption. The prospect of trading violence with young, hungry criminals willing to dismember their enemies on camera had limited appeal. Most crucially, the Angels faced something they hadn't encountered in decades: defections from their protection racket. The BFM's brutal campaign had convinced a significant number of street-level dealers that Angels' protection wasn't worth the 10% tax, either because that protection was proving ineffective against Termel's crew, or because paying it might actually make them targets. By early 2024, the Angels had a revenue problem, said a financial crimes investigator. Their Quebec City territory was seeing a 30 to 40% reduction in tribute payments. Dealers were either going independent, joining the BFM, or simply moving operations to areas with less conflict. The business model was under threat. The initial negotiations, according to multiple intelligence sources, centered on a territorial compromise, essentially dividing Quebec City into spheres of influence, with the Angels maintaining control over established areas while recognizing BFM authority in newer territories. This represented an extraordinary concession from an organization that had never acknowledged competitors as equals. These weren't friendly talks, clarified a source close to the negotiations. Both sides understood they were temporary tactical adjustments. The Angels were playing for time, hoping law enforcement would solve their Termel problem. The BFM was consolidating gains while their leader operated from overseas. The negotiations never resulted in a formal peace treaty. Violence continued sporadically throughout the period, with each side testing boundaries and responding to provocations. But the mere existence of dialogue represented a profound shift in Quebec's criminal power dynamics. For the first time in decades, the Hells Angels were treating a challenger as a force to be reckoned with, rather than an annoyance to be crushed. By the time Termel was captured in Italy, the negotiations had established a de facto partition of certain territories and markets. The Angels maintained control over traditional strongholds, while BFM influence had solidified in areas they had specifically targeted, particularly neighborhoods with younger demographics and newer drug markets like synthetic opioids. What Termel achieved wasn't just carving out territory, observed a criminology professor. He forced a generational reckoning within organized crime. The Angels had to confront the reality that their old playbook, overwhelming force, rigid hierarchy, traditional revenue models, might not work against modern challengers operating by different rules. The negotiation phase of the conflict revealed something few had anticipated. The Hells Angels, for all their fearsome reputation, had developed institutional inertia. Decades of dominance had made them adaptable in business, but rigid in conflict resolution. Termel exploited this rigidity, creating problems the Angels' traditional methods couldn't easily solve. Perhaps the most lasting impact of these forced negotiations was their effect on the Angels' aura of invincibility. The message to the criminal underworld was clear: even the mighty Hells Angels could be brought to the bargaining table by sufficient pressure applied intelligently. That knowledge continues to reshape Quebec's criminal landscape even after Termel's capture. As Dave Termel sits in Regina Coeli prison, awaiting whatever legal fate awaits him, his legacy isn't just the blood he spilled or the empire he built. It's the fundamental questions he forced upon North America's most established criminal organization. Can hierarchical, tradition-bound organizations survive in an era of decentralized networks? Can aging criminal enterprises adapt to challenges from digital natives who play by different rules? The answers remain unclear, but one thing is certain. The criminal underworld that existed before Dave Termel will never be quite the same again.
The man killed outside a Burlington restaurant earlier this week was a longtime member of the Hells Angels. Halton police identified him as 55-year-old Craig McKillum of Oakville, who also went by the name Craig Brown. McKillum was among 30 people charged in an illegal gambling and money laundering investigation 2 years ago, a case in which charges weren't proven in court. The fatal shooting happened Tuesday night around 8:30 in the parking lot of a Mandarin restaurant on Fairview Street near Brant Street in Burlington. Halton police are still looking for the shooter or shooters. They're asking anyone with dash cam footage in the area between 4 and 10 p.m. on Tuesday to contact them. They're also trying to identify this gray Honda Civic they believe was involved in the shooting.
A quiet Tuesday dinner turned deadly when Hells Angel Craig Truck MacIlcoham was gunned down outside a Mandarin restaurant. The former bodyguard to Canada's most powerful biker boss was shot once in the chest while his family waited inside. Police are hunting a mysterious grey Honda Civic, but insiders whisper his murder wasn't random. Was it revenge? A power struggle? Or did his secret double life finally catch up with him? The double life that ended in tragedy.
The president of a bike chapter in the Bronx, he was coming out of a gas station and he got straight up like assassinated.
So I know him, and my big brother is a pagan. That dude was a pagan and he was a blood. And they knew that that was about to get real, because now he was gonna put the Bloods on bikes, and that would have been checkmate, you know?
So who hit it?
That was the support club.
So the Hells Angels
affiliates support club
hit the pagan president.
Yeah.
Craig McIlcoham wasn't just your average suburban dad from Oakville. On weekdays, he was Craig Brown, the guy who drove his kids to school, maintained a perfect lawn, and blended seamlessly into neighborhood life. He was the guy who'd wave hello at the local coffee shop, attend parent-teacher meetings, and never raise eyebrows. His neighbors described him as quiet, friendly, and completely unremarkable. Exactly how he wanted to be seen. But behind this carefully constructed facade lived a completely different man. Craig was a patched member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, not some weekend warrior who played dress-up, but a full-fledged insider with deep connections throughout Ontario's criminal networks. Friends say he'd been with the club for over a decade, rising through the ranks during a period when the Angels were consolidating power across southern Ontario. Unlike some of his flashier brothers, who wore their colors proudly and courted attention, Craig operated like a ghost. He kept his worlds completely separate, family in Oakville, club business elsewhere. This separation wasn't just preference, it was survival. In the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, the ability to move between different spheres without drawing attention is invaluable. Craig McIlcoham's story is a haunting illustration of the precarious balance required to maintain a double life, and the devastating consequences when that balance fails. By day, he was Craig Brown, the suburban family man who blended seamlessly into Oakville's middle-class landscape. He drove his children to school, maintained his lawn, and participated in the ordinary rhythms of neighborhood life. This carefully constructed facade concealed his true identity as a patched member of the Hells Angels, with deep ties to Ontario's criminal networks. Living between these two worlds required extraordinary compartmentalization. As one associate noted, Craig didn't take unnecessary risks. He kept his worlds separate. This discipline allowed him to navigate the dangerous currents of organized crime while maintaining the appearance of suburban normalcy. For years, this duality worked. His neighbors had no idea about his criminal connections, while his associates respected his ability to operate under the radar. The psychological toll of such compartmentalization can be immense. Constantly switching between identities creates a fracturing of the self. You become neither fully one person nor the other. Trust becomes transactional rather than authentic. Relationships in both worlds remain inherently incomplete because neither side knows the whole person. When Project Hobart swept Craig up in 2019, the first major cracks appeared in his carefully constructed life. Suddenly, his criminal associations were public knowledge, and his legal troubles threatened to collapse both of his worlds simultaneously. Though the charges were eventually dropped, the damage was done. Everyone now knew who Craig really was. What makes Craig's story particularly tragic is the fatalism that seemed to overtake him in his final months. Despite credible threats against his life, he maintained his routines and took no additional security precautions. This behavior suggests either a profound denial of his vulnerability or, perhaps more likely, a resignation to his fate. After decades of living divided, perhaps Craig understood that such existences rarely end peacefully. His murder in the Mandarin restaurant parking lot represents the violent collision of his two worlds, a public execution in a suburban setting. The professional nature of the hit, the clean getaway, and the wall of silence that followed all speak to the deadly seriousness of the criminal world he inhabited. In the end, Craig's story serves as a stark reminder that double lives are ultimately unsustainable. The center cannot hold indefinitely, and when it collapses, the consequences can be fatal. His suburban neighbors lost Craig Brown, the family man they thought they knew. His criminal associates lost Craig McKilquam, the reliable Hell's Angel, and his family lost both, along with any hope of ever truly understanding the man who moved between these worlds. He wasn't the guy with the loud bike and leather vest at the school pickup. One source familiar with Craig explained, he was calculated about everything: how he dressed, who he spoke to, where he went. Nothing was accidental. This carefully balanced double life came crashing down on April 29, 2025, when a single gunshot in a Burlington restaurant parking lot exposed everything Craig had worked to keep hidden. As police descended on the Mandarin restaurant and news crews captured footage of his body being removed, the carefully constructed walls between his two lives collapsed completely. This double life wasn't just Craig's personal choice, it reflected the changing nature of organized crime in Canada. The old stereotype of bikers as loud, brash troublemakers has evolved into something much more sophisticated. Today's criminal organizations need members who can operate in both worlds, and Craig mastered this balancing act until someone decided his time was up. A professional hit that left police baffled. The killing itself was a masterclass in professional execution. On that Tuesday evening in April, diners at the popular Mandarin buffet heard what many described as a single pop, like a firecracker. By the time anyone realized what had happened, Craig McKilquam was already lying beside his black SUV with a single bullet hole in his chest. An off-duty nurse attempted CPR, but it was clear to first responders that death had been instantaneous. What struck investigators immediately was the clinical precision of the hit. One shot, perfectly placed, no missed attempts, no spray of bullets, no collateral damage. Just a single fatal wound delivered with surgical accuracy. The killer hadn't left behind shell casings, suggesting the use of a revolver specifically chosen because it doesn't eject spent casings. The murder weapon has never been recovered. Even more impressive was the killer's escape. Despite the restaurant's busy parking lot and dozens of potential witnesses, nobody saw the shooter flee. One moment someone was approaching Craig's vehicle, and the next they had vanished completely. 3 separate diners noticed a figure in dark clothing with a hood pulled up approaching Craig's SUV between 8:10 and 8:19 p.m., but descriptions remained frustratingly vague. This wasn't some amateur hour, explained a veteran Halton Regional Police detective who spoke on condition of anonymity. The shooter knew exactly where the security cameras couldn't see. They knew exactly where their target would be. They knew exactly how to disappear afterward. This level of planning suggests someone with resources, patience, and connections. The execution of Craig McKilquam in the Mandarin restaurant parking lot stands as a textbook example of a professional hit. Methodical, efficient, and frustratingly difficult to solve. The single gunshot that took his life on that April evening was just the final act in what investigators believe was a meticulously orchestrated elimination. What continues to baffle Halton Regional Police is the clinical precision with which the hit was carried out. The shooter chose a location with known surveillance blind spots, suggesting intimate familiarity with the restaurant's security setup. Craig's vehicle was parked in an area that offered both easy access for the killer and minimal risk of being recorded, a detail too convenient to be coincidental. The timing itself speaks to professional calculation. The shooter struck during the dinner rush when the restaurant was busy enough that a single firecracker sound wouldn't immediately trigger panic, but witnesses would be distracted with their meals. The 8:21 p.m. timing meant darkness had fallen, further obscuring visual identification while still ensuring enough ambient activity to provide cover for the killer's escape. Most tellingly, the murder weapon appears to have been a revolver a choice that investigators recognize as deliberately forensic conscious. Unlike semi-automatic pistols that eject shell casings, revolvers retain their spent cartridges, leaving police without these crucial pieces of ballistic evidence. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. It was executed by someone who understood how to minimize forensic traces. The phantom gray Honda Civic, reported by multiple witnesses, has become the investigation's most maddening dead end. Despite public appeals for information and extensive review of traffic cameras in the surrounding areas, the vehicle effectively vanished. Investigators suspect the car likely had stolen or swapped plates, another hallmark of professional planning. What truly distinguishes this case from typical homicides is the complete wall of silence that descended immediately afterward. Not a single member of McKilquam's criminal circle has provided usable information. This organized silence is something police rarely encounter outside of sophisticated criminal organizations, where the consequences for cooperation with authorities are severe and widely understood. Detective Sarah Patel, who led the initial investigation, noted off the record that the case bears all the hallmarks of what organized crime experts call a sanctioned hit, an elimination approved at high levels within criminal hierarchies and carried out by specialists. These aren't impulsive acts of violence, but calculated removals of individuals deemed problematic. The aftermath has been equally professional. No boasting, no loose talk, no apparent power struggles to fill Craig's position. This suggests his elimination wasn't just accepted, but expected within his criminal circles. The investigation remains active, but has stalled without fresh leads or witness cooperation. For Halton Regional Police, the McKilquam case represents a sobering reminder of the limitations of modern investigative techniques when confronted with the discipline and resources of organized crime. Without someone breaking ranks, the professional hit that ended Craig McKilquam's double life may remain the perfect crime, meticulously planned, flawlessly executed, and perpetually unsolved. The only substantial lead emerged when multiple witnesses mentioned seeing a gray Honda Civic with dark-tinted windows and black alloy rims in the area before and after the shooting. Despite this information being released to the public and extensive review of surveillance footage from neighboring businesses, the vehicle was never definitively identified. The professional nature of the hit sent shockwaves through both the criminal underworld and law enforcement circles. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment killing or a sloppy revenge shooting. It was calculated, cold-blooded murder carried out with the kind of efficiency that suggests serious organization. The question wasn't just who pulled the trigger, but who had the resources and connections to order such a professional hit. Project Hobart, the case that put him in the crosshairs. To understand why Craig McKilquam ended up dead in a parking lot, you need to understand what happened 3 years earlier. In 2019, Craig found himself swept up in a massive police investigation codenamed Project Hobart. This wasn't just another drug bust, it was a sophisticated operation targeting illegal gambling and money laundering across Ontario. The numbers were staggering: 30 individuals charged, millions in assets seized, and a criminal network that reached into legitimate businesses, sports betting operations, and offshore banking. Craig wasn't some bit player caught in the net. Investigators placed him near the center of operations. Facing serious charges that included possession of a restricted weapon, bookmaking, and most significantly, committing offenses for the benefit of a criminal organization. That last charge was the killer. Designed specifically to dismantle organized crime, it carried potential decades in prison. For 3 years, Craig lived under the shadow of these charges. His movements monitored, his associates scrutinized, his future uncertain. The case dominated headlines and put enormous pressure on everyone involved in the organization. Then in 2022, something unexpected happened. All charges against Craig were dropped due to trial delays. Canada's Supreme Court had established that criminal proceedings exceeding 30 months violate constitutional rights to timely justice. Project Hobart's complexity meant the estimated trial duration was 41 months, well beyond the legal limit. Craig walked free on a technicality, but freedom came with a price. Everyone now knew he'd been targeted by police, identified as a key player in organized crime, and positioned to potentially testify against former associates. In the criminal world, being labeled a potential informant can be a death sentence, even if you never actually cooperated. Project Hobart stands as one of the most ambitious organized crime investigations in Ontario's recent history. Launched in 2019, this sprawling police operation targeted illegal gambling and money laundering operations across the province, eventually ensnaring Craig McIlquim along with 29 other individuals. While the investigation ultimately failed to secure convictions against McIlquim due to trial delays, it fundamentally altered his standing in the criminal world and likely set in motion the events that would lead to his execution. The scope of Project Hobart was breathtaking. Millions in assets seized, dozens charged, and a complex criminal network exposed. Police spent years building the case, using wiretaps, surveillance, financial forensics, and confidential informants to map out an elaborate system where illegal gambling proceeds were laundered through legitimate businesses across southern Ontario. For McIlquim, the charges were potentially devastating: possession of a restricted weapon, bookmaking, and most seriously, committing offenses for the benefit of a criminal organization. This last charge carried decades of potential prison time and was designed specifically to dismantle organized crime networks. Investigators hadn't positioned McIlquim as a peripheral figure. They placed him near the operational center of the criminal enterprise. The 3 years McIlquim lived under these charges fundamentally changed his life. His movements were monitored, his communications scrutinized, and his associations carefully tracked. More damaging still was the perception within his criminal circles. In the outlaw biker world, being charged doesn't necessarily damage your standing, but being positioned to potentially inform on others does. The longer the case dragged on, the more pressure McIlquim faced, and the more suspicious his associates became. When all charges against McIlquim were dropped in 2022 due to trial delays exceeding Canada's 30-month limit, it should have been cause for celebration. Instead, it may have sealed his fate. Everyone now knew he'd been identified by police as a key player in organized crime. More critically, his former associates had to consider an uncomfortable possibility. What if McIlquim had considered cooperation during those 3 uncertain years? Criminal organizations operate on absolute trust and the elimination of risk. Even the possibility that McIlquim might have been tempted to cooperate, or might do so if charged again in the future, could have been enough to mark him for elimination. In this world, potential informants aren't given the benefit of the doubt. The timing is particularly telling. McIlquim was killed 3 years after his charges were dropped, long enough for suspicions to harden, for tensions to build, and for careful planning to take place. Criminal organizations often bide their time, waiting for memories to fade and for targets to lower their guard. The ultimate irony of Project Hobart is that it failed in its primary objective of securing convictions against figures like McIlquim, but may have inadvertently succeeded in marking him as a liability within his own criminal organization. The very investigation meant to bring down organized crime may have triggered its brutal internal justice system instead. For investigators still working the McIlquim murder, the shadow of Project Hobart looms large. The key to his execution likely lies somewhere in those thousands of pages of evidence, wiretap transcripts, and financial records, clues to which relationships were damaged beyond repair and which secrets were too dangerous to leave in McIlquim's possession. The moment those charges were dropped, the clock started ticking, explained one former law enforcement officer familiar with outlaw motorcycle clubs. It didn't matter that he never talked. What mattered was that people thought he might. In that world, perception is reality. Did Project Hobart's collapse create the conditions for Craig's murder 3 years later? Did former associates worry about what he might reveal if pressured again? Or did rivals see his legal troubles as evidence of weakness, making him a target for elimination? These questions lead directly to the mysterious meeting Craig attended just hours before his death. The Industrial Park mystery, his final hours. What makes Craig McIlquim's murder particularly intriguing is what happened in the hours leading up to his death. Security footage pieced together by investigators reveals a man following his normal routine with no apparent awareness that death was stalking him. Around 4 p.m. on that fateful Tuesday, Craig was captured on security cameras at a gas station in Oakville. He appeared relaxed, alone, and unhurried. filling his tank and buying coffee like thousands of other suburban commuters. But then his movements became far more interesting. At approximately 6:30 p.m., just 2 hours before his death, surveillance footage showed Craig's black SUV pulling into an industrial park in North Burlington. This wasn't his neighborhood, and he had no obvious business there. What made this location particularly significant to investigators was that this same industrial park was known to police as a regular meeting location for outlaw bikers. Craig remained in the area for roughly 20 minutes before departing. Police found no evidence of a planned meeting, no text messages, no calls, no advanced coordination, yet his presence there was clearly intentional. What happened during those 20 minutes? Was he meeting someone, delivering something, settling a dispute? Despite extensive investigation, this critical window remains shrouded in mystery. Even more puzzling is what happened next. The gap between 6:30 p.m. when Craig left the industrial park and his arrival at the Mandarin restaurant around 8 p.m. remains unaccounted for. Where did he go? What did he do? And most importantly, did someone follow him from that industrial park to his final destination? What we do know is that Craig made no effort to vary his route or check for surveillance. His phone records show no unusual activity. He wasn't using burner devices or taking counter-surveillance measures. For someone who'd lived under police scrutiny and reportedly received credible death threats, his behavior seems remarkably careless. Unless, of course, he was exactly where someone wanted him to be. The final hours of Craig McKilquam's life contain a critical puzzle piece that may hold the key to his murder, his unexplained visit to an industrial park on the evening of his death. Security footage captured his black SUV in this area, known to police as a meeting location for outlaw bikers, for approximately 20 minutes between 6:30 p.m. and 7 p.m. What happened during those 20 minutes has become one of the most tantalizing mysteries in the investigation. The industrial park in question sits in a nondescript area of Burlington, a collection of warehouses, distribution centers, and small manufacturing facilities that largely empty out after business hours. By early evening, the area becomes a ghost town of vacant parking lots and darkened buildings, making it ideal for discreet meetings away from prying eyes and surveillance cameras. Investigators have confirmed that Craig had no legitimate business connections to any company in the industrial park. No appointment was logged in his phone, no text messages arranged a meeting, and no calls were placed to or from his phone during this time. His presence there was clearly intentional, yet completely off the official record, a hallmark of someone accustomed to conducting business that leaves no digital footprint. What makes this visit particularly significant is its timing. Just hours before his execution, this wasn't a random stop, but likely the final piece in a sequence of events that culminated in his murder. Did Craig receive information during this meeting that led him to the Mandarin restaurant? Was he given instructions, threatened, or perhaps warned about what was to come? One former Hells Angels member, speaking anonymously to investigators, suggested that such industrial locations often serve as neutral ground for sensitive discussions, territory not directly controlled by any single criminal faction, where parties can meet with reduced risk of surveillance or ambush. If Craig was meeting someone there, it suggests a matter of significant importance or delicacy. More troubling is the possibility that this meeting was part of the setup for his murder. Was Craig deliberately directed to the Mandarin restaurant afterward? Did someone at the industrial park alert the killer that Craig was en route to his final destination? The timing certainly suggests coordination between whoever Craig met at 6:30 p.m. and whoever shot him at 8:21 p.m. Investigators have scoured surveillance cameras from surrounding businesses, but the industrial park's limited security coverage has yielded few clues. One partial image captured a second vehicle, possibly dark-colored, parked near Craig's SUV, but the quality is too poor to identify the make or occupants. The gap between leaving the industrial park and arriving at the Mandarin restaurant remains equally mysterious. Craig's movements during this approximately 90-minute window are unaccounted for. Gas station cameras, traffic lights, and business security systems along possible routes have revealed nothing conclusive about his path or any stops he might have made. This industrial park visit represents the last known action Craig took of his own volition before his murder. a deliberate choice that likely sealed his fate. Whatever transpired during those 20 minutes set in motion the final sequence that would end with a single gunshot in a restaurant parking lot. Until someone breaks the code of silence surrounding Craig's associates, those critical 20 minutes may remain the unsolved heart of this execution. Something happened at that industrial park, a Halton Regional Police investigator told local media. Whether Craig knew he was being set up or whether he was completely blindsided, that location is key to understanding what happened later that night. The industrial park connection raises disturbing questions about premeditation. Was Craig lured to the Mandarin as part of a plan set in motion earlier that day? Did someone at the industrial park meeting decide his fate? These questions lead us to examine the different theories about who wanted Craig McKilquam dead and why. Theories behind the murder: loyalty, betrayal, or business. With the investigation still officially open but growing colder by the day, several theories have emerged about why Craig McKilquam was executed that night in Burlington. The first and perhaps most straightforward theory centers on internal club discipline. The Hells Angels have a documented history of violently enforcing loyalty and secrecy. If Craig violated club rules or protocols, perhaps by skimming profits, speaking to the wrong people, or making unauthorized decisions, the organization might have sanctioned his removal. Some former law enforcement officers point to the professional nature of the hit as evidence of an inside job. The killer knew exactly where to find Craig, how to approach him without raising suspicion, and how to disappear afterward. All hallmarks of someone with inside information. The second theory involves Craig's legal troubles from Project Hobart. Despite charges being dropped, suspicion may have lingered about his reliability. In criminal organizations that operate on absolute trust, even the perception of cooperation with authorities can be fatal. It doesn't matter if he actually talked, explained one former undercover officer. What matters is that he was in a position where he could have. The 3-year gap between his legal troubles and his murder might simply reflect patience, waiting until suspicion had died down before acting. A third possibility is financial or territorial disputes. Craig's involvement in gambling and money laundering operations meant he handled significant amounts of cash and maintained connections with various criminal enterprises. A disagreement over territory, profits, or business arrangements could have escalated to violence. The meeting at the industrial park hours before his death suggests ongoing business negotiations that may have gone sideways. Perhaps most intriguing is the theory that Craig's extensive knowledge made him dangerous. After years in the organization, he would have accumulated damaging information about operations, personnel, and criminal activities. If he was planning to leave the organization, retire, or change allegiances, eliminating him might have been seen as necessary risk management. Finally, there's the possibility of personal vengeance. In Craig's world, grudges can simmer for years before boiling over. Someone with a long-standing grievance, perhaps related to past business dealings, romantic entanglements, or perceived disrespect, may have finally decided to settle accounts permanently. The execution of Craig McKilquam presents investigators with multiple plausible motives, each deeply rooted in the complex world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, where loyalty, betrayal, and business are inextricably intertwined. Understanding which of these factors ultimately led to his death requires peeling back layers of criminal culture that deliberately resist outside scrutiny. In the world of Hells Angels, loyalty isn't merely valued, it's enforced. The organization operates on a strict hierarchy with clearly defined rules and expectations. Members swear oaths of allegiance that supersede all other relationships, including family ties. Breaking these codes of conduct isn't met with termination letters or lawsuits. Consequences are often swift and violent. If McKilquam violated internal protocols or was perceived to have compromised the organization's security, his elimination may have been sanctioned from within. The betrayal theory centers on the aftermath of Project Hobart. When major criminal cases collapse, participants often look at each other with newfound suspicion. Though McKilquam was never formally labeled an informant, the mere possibility that he might have considered cooperation could mark him for death. In outlaw motorcycle clubs, the appearance of cooperation with authorities can be as damning as actual betrayal. The 3-year gap between the collapse of Project Hobart and McKilquam's murder fits the pattern of organizations that prioritize careful planning over immediate vengeance. A third possibility revolves around business disputes. The criminal enterprises associated with outlaw motorcycle clubs generate millions in revenue from illegal gambling, drug trafficking, and money laundering. These aren't informal operations, but sophisticated networks with substantial investments and profits. Conflicts over territory, profit distribution, or strategic direction can escalate to violence when traditional business remedies aren't available. McIlquham's position near the operational center of the organization would have given him influence over lucrative criminal ventures and potentially made him a target for those wanting a larger share. Some investigators have proposed a hybrid theory that McIlquham was attempting to distance himself from criminal activities following his legal troubles. In organized crime, there's often no such thing as a clean exit. Knowledge of operations, contacts, and methodologies makes former members dangerous liabilities. If McIlquham was trying to extricate himself from the organization while maintaining his suburban life, this alone could have triggered his elimination. The industrial park meeting hours before his death may point to yet another possibility: that McIlquham had become entangled in a power struggle within the organization. Such transitions are particularly dangerous moments in criminal hierarchies, where succession isn't governed by bylaws, but by alliances, intimidation, and sometimes bloodshed. Was he summoned to that meeting to be warned, threatened, or given one last chance to fall in line? What makes this case particularly confounding is that these theories aren't mutually exclusive. In the complex ecosystem of organized crime, motives blend and overlap. McIlquham may have violated loyalty protocols while also threatening business interests and appearing potentially cooperative with authorities. A perfect storm of factors that made him too dangerous to remain alive. For Halton Regional Police, the challenge isn't finding a motive, but rather determining which of many possible motives ultimately triggered the professional hit, until someone from McIlquham's inner circle breaks ranks, an unlikely prospect given the consequences. The true reasoning behind his execution may remain as carefully buried as the gun that ended his double life. What's clear from all these theories is that Craig McIlquham's death wasn't random. It was the calculated elimination of a man who knew too much, had crossed the wrong people, or simply outlived his usefulness to a dangerous organization. His story serves as a stark reminder that in the criminal underworld, no one is untouchable, no secret stays buried forever, and loyalty lasts only until it becomes a liability. The search for Craig's killer continues, with police still seeking information about that grey Honda Civic and what really happened during those mysterious 20 minutes at the industrial park. Until someone breaks the code of silence, Craig's murder remains another unsolved chapter in the violent history of outlaw motorcycle clubs in Canada. The family man behind the patch. Behind the Hells Angels patch and the nickname Truck, Craig McIlquham was also a family man. On the night he was murdered, witnesses report he wasn't alone at the Mandarin restaurant. His family was waiting inside. This detail adds another layer of tragedy to an already shocking crime. While Craig navigated the dangerous waters of outlaw motorcycle club life, he also maintained connections to a normal family existence that was shattered in an instant on that April evening. He was having dinner with his family when it happened. One restaurant patron recalled, "One minute everything's normal, the next there's chaos in the parking lot and children are crying. It was horrible." This duality defined Craig's existence. To his family, he was a provider, a father, a husband. To law enforcement and his criminal associates, he was Truck McIlquham, a patched Hells Angels member with deep connections across Ontario's criminal landscape. Maintaining these separate identities required constant vigilance and compartmentalization, skills Craig had mastered over his years in the club. What makes the timing of the hit particularly cold-blooded was the choice to strike when Craig's family was nearby. Was this simply opportunity, or was it a calculated message? In the world of organized crime, how and where someone is killed often carries symbolic weight. A public execution outside a family restaurant could be interpreted as a warning to others. No one is untouchable, nowhere is safe, and family connections won't protect you. The presence of Craig's family that night raises questions about what they knew of his double life. Were they aware of his Hells Angels affiliation? Had they been sheltered from this reality, or were they active participants in maintaining his cover? In the aftermath of his death, his family retreated from public view, protected by both police and, reportedly, members of Craig's chapter. Behind the hardened exterior of Craig McKilquam, the patched Hells Angel who met his violent end in a Burlington parking lot, existed another identity entirely. Craig Brown, a family man whose suburban life in Oakville revealed a completely different side of his complex personality. This duality wasn't merely a cover story, but a genuine parallel existence that those closest to him insist was equally authentic. In Oakville's Falgarwood neighborhood, Craig was known as a present and engaged father. Neighbors recall seeing him coaching his son's hockey team on weekends, his booming voice calling encouragement from the sidelines. During summer months, he was often spotted meticulously maintaining his lawn, exchanging casual conversation about property values and neighborhood developments. These weren't performances, but genuine aspects of a man who compartmentalized his life with remarkable discipline. He never missed a school concert, recalled one neighbor who lived across the street for over 7 years. You'd see him sitting there, recording everything on his phone like any other proud dad. Nothing about him screamed organized crime or dangerous. He was just Craig, who always had time to help you jumpstart your car in winter. His modest 2-story home contained no obvious signs of criminal wealth, no flashy vehicles in the driveway, no ostentatious renovations that might draw attention. Craig drove a sensible black SUV, wore casual but unremarkable clothing, and maintained the kind of middle-class lifestyle that blends seamlessly into suburban Ontario. This restraint wasn't coincidental, but calculated, part of his strategy to separate his criminal associations from his family sanctuary. Craig's wife, Maria, name changed for privacy, has remained intensely private since his death, declining all interview requests. Friends describe her as initially shocked by her husband's murder, but not by the revelations about his Hells Angels affiliation. This suggests a relationship built on an unspoken understanding. Maria may not have known operational details, but likely recognized the source of their financial stability came from beyond Craig's vague consulting business. His children present perhaps the most poignant aspect of his divided life. Craig was, by all accounts, a devoted father who attended parent-teacher conferences, helped with homework, and created boundaries to keep his criminal activities entirely separate from his parenting role. The tragedy of his murder extends beyond his own death to include the traumatic shattering of his children's understanding of their father. What makes Craig's case so compelling is that neither side of his life appears to have been purely performative. Associates from his Hells Angels connections describe a man who genuinely valued his family life and worked diligently to keep them insulated from his criminal endeavors. Meanwhile, those who knew him as a neighbor and father insist his warmth and engagement in community life were authentic, not merely a calculated facade. This duality raises profound questions about identity and compartmentalization. Was Craig Brown the real person, with Hells Angel Craig McKilquam being the necessary persona he adopted to support his family? Or was his outlaw identity his true self, with the suburban dad being the carefully constructed alternative? Perhaps most accurately, he was simply both, a man who navigated two authentic but incompatible worlds until that fatal moment when they violently collided. This family connection shows how organized crime impacts not just its direct participants, but creates ripple effects that extend to innocent bystanders. While Craig chose his path, his family became collateral damage in a world they may not have fully understood. A world that eventually reached out and claimed Craig in front of a popular suburban restaurant. International connections, a web of relationships. Craig Truck McKilquam wasn't just connected locally. His influence and relationships spanned across borders. In the days following his murder, his memorial page received tributes from Switzerland, Denmark, and various Caribbean islands. These international connections point to a man whose reach extended far beyond the GTA, raising questions about what exactly his role was within the larger Hells Angels organization. Truck was respected everywhere, wrote one commenter from St. Martin in the Caribbean. Another from Zurich posted simply, "Brotherhood is forever. Ride in peace." The absence of public Canadian tributes was notable, potentially indicating caution among local associates who didn't want to draw police attention, but the international outpouring suggested McKilquam had built relationships across the global Hells Angels network, a feat that typically indicates significant status within the organization. Law enforcement sources familiar with outlaw motorcycle clubs note that international connections often relate to drug trafficking, money laundering, or other cross-border criminal enterprises. The Caribbean, in particular, has long served as both a vacation destination and financial hub for organized crime figures looking to move or hide assets. When someone has contacts in Switzerland, the Caribbean, and Denmark, they're not just a local enforcer, explained one former intelligence officer who specialized in outlaw motorcycle gangs. Those are strategic locations for financial operations, drug routes, and organizational networking. Craig McKilquam's murder investigation revealed a dimension of his life that extended far beyond Ontario's borders, an intricate web of international relationships that connected his activities to a global criminal network. While the Hells Angels are often perceived as a localized threat, the reality is far more complex. They operate as a sophisticated multinational organization with chapters in over 50 countries and an estimated 5,000 members worldwide. McKilquam's role within this international framework appears to have been more substantial than initially suspected. Intelligence files recovered during Project Hobart revealed his frequent travel to Europe, particularly to the Netherlands and Germany, where the Hells Angels maintain a strong presence. These weren't vacation trips, but working relationships, McKilquam serving as a liaison between Canadian operations and their European counterparts. Financial forensics conducted during the investigation exposed a pattern of international money movements that suggested McKilquam wasn't merely a foot soldier, but rather a trusted facilitator in cross-border operations. Banking records showed complex transactions flowing through accounts in Luxembourg and Cyprus before reaching final destinations in Canada, a sophisticated money laundering operation that required both technical knowledge and high-level connections. McKilquam operated at the nexus of international relationships, noted one organized crime analyst familiar with the case. He understood both the Canadian criminal landscape and how it interconnected with operations abroad. That made him valuable and eventually vulnerable. His connections extended beyond Europe to Asia as well. In the 3 years prior to his murder, McKilquam made multiple trips to Thailand and Vietnam, countries where outlaw motorcycle clubs have expanded their presence dramatically in recent years. These emerging markets for both legitimate and criminal enterprises represent new frontiers for organizations like the Hells Angels, who have been establishing footholds throughout Southeast Asia. What makes these international connections particularly relevant to McKilquam's murder is the possibility that the order for his execution may not have originated locally. Criminal organizations with global reach can exercise authority across borders, with decisions made in Amsterdam or Bangkok potentially triggering actions in Burlington, Ontario. This international dimension exponentially complicates investigations, as motives may lie thousands of miles from the crime scene. Perhaps most intriguing was a series of encrypted communications recovered from McKilquam's devices. Though heavily protected, forensic specialists managed to decode fragments of conversations with contacts in Australia and South Africa. These discussions referenced what appeared to be a significant reorganization within the global Hells Angels structure, a potential power shift that could have left McKilquam caught between competing factions. This international context may explain why the case has proven so difficult to solve. Witnesses fear not just local repercussions, but the reach of a truly global organization. Evidence trails disappear across international borders. Potential suspects may not even reside in Canada. The professional hit could have been carried out by someone brought in specifically for the job, entering the country briefly and departing immediately afterward. For investigators, McKilquam's international connections represent both a promising avenue of inquiry and a frustrating obstacle. Every new relationship uncovered branches into dozens more, creating an ever-expanding network that stretches resources thin. Yet somewhere in this global web may lie the answer to who decided Craig McKilquam's double life had reached its end, and dispatched a professional to ensure it. These international relationships shed light on another potential motive for Craig's murder. If he was involved in coordinating cross-border operations, any disruption in those activities could mean millions in lost revenue. a dispute over international business, perhaps triggered by his previous legal troubles from Project Hobart, might have made powerful enemies both at home and abroad. McIlquham's global connections also explain the professional nature of his killing. Someone with his reach would only be targeted after careful consideration of the consequences. His murder wasn't just the elimination of one man, it represented a significant disruption in a network that spanned continents. A decision that wouldn't have been made lightly or by lower-ranking individuals. The road name, Why Truck, mattered. In outlaw motorcycle club culture, road names aren't just nicknames, they're identities that often reveal something significant about the person. Craig McIlquham was known throughout the biker world as Truck, a moniker that carried weight and meaning within the organization. Understanding why he was called Truck provides insights into his role and reputation within the Hells Angels. Road names aren't random, explains one former motorcycle club member who left the life behind. They stick because they capture something essential about the person, whether it's something they did, how they look, or their role in the club. So why Truck? Sources familiar with McIlquham suggest the nickname reflected his imposing physical presence and his reliability. Like a truck, he was solid, dependable, and capable of handling heavy loads, whether those were literal responsibilities or metaphorical burdens within the organization. Others suggest it stemmed from his earlier career in logistics before becoming fully immersed in club life. Road names also serve a practical purpose in the criminal world. They provide a layer of insulation when discussing club business. Law enforcement intercepting communications about Truck handling a situation would have a harder time establishing in court that this referred specifically to Craig McIlquham, offering a thin but useful layer of deniability. Within the Hells Angels, being known by your road name across multiple chapters indicates a certain level of respect and recognition. The international tributes to Truck, rather than to Craig, show how his identity within the club had become his primary persona in certain circles. This dual identity, Craig to his family, Truck to his brothers, mirrors the compartmentalization that defined his life. The road name also gives us clues about his history. Earning a name like Truck suggests years of building a reputation for reliability and strength. This wasn't someone who had recently patched in. This was a veteran with enough history to have developed a distinct identity within the organization. That long history means he would have accumulated significant knowledge about operations, personalities, and secrets, potentially making him both valuable and dangerous. Road names in clubs like the Hells Angels serve multiple practical purposes. They provide members with an additional layer of insulation from law enforcement, create brotherhood bonds through shared internal language, and often reflect a member's reputation, physical characteristics, or significant incidents from their past. For Craig, the name Truck wasn't randomly assigned, but earned through specific actions and attributes that defined his role. According to former associates, the name originated early in Craig's affiliation with the club. His imposing physical presence, standing 6 feet 4 inches and weighing over 250 pounds, provided the obvious connection, but the nickname carried deeper significance. In outlaw biker culture, to be a truck meant being reliable, powerful, and capable of moving heavy loads without complaint, both literally and figuratively. When something needed to get done, especially something difficult, Truck was who you called, explained one former associate who requested anonymity. The name wasn't just about his size, it was about dependability when things got complicated. This reliability extended beyond physical intimidation to logistical operations. Craig's background in transportation before joining the Hells Angels gave him specialized knowledge that proved valuable for moving both legal and illegal cargo. His understanding of shipping routes, customs procedures, and transportation regulations made him an asset for cross-border operations that formed the backbone of the organization's business interests. The road name Truck carried significant status within the club. Unlike more colorful or derogatory nicknames often assigned to newer members, Craig's moniker reflected respect and acknowledged his utility to the organization. When members referred to Truck, they were invoking not just a person, but a known quantity, someone with established credibility and a specific skill set. In the aftermath of his murder, the name Truck has taken on new significance. Within club circles, references to his death are made using only this road name, a final acknowledgement of his identity within the organization. For investigators, understanding the full implications of this nickname has provided valuable insight into Craig's role and the potential motivations behind his execution. The man may have died in a Burlington parking lot, but the legacy of Truck continues to reverberate through the criminal underworld he inhabited. As investigators pieced together the final days of Craig Truck McKilquam, they had to consider both identities, the suburban father and the patched Hell's Angel, to understand why someone decided he needed to die. The road name that followed him for years ultimately became part of his legacy in death, appearing in tributes from brothers around the world who knew him not as Craig, but always as Truck. The Code of Silence: Why the Case Went Cold. Despite the public nature of Craig McKilquam's execution, the investigation quickly hit a wall that's familiar to anyone who's worked organized crime cases: the unbreakable Code of Silence. This omerta, borrowed from traditional mafia culture but equally powerful in outlaw motorcycle clubs, ensures that witnesses don't cooperate, associates don't talk, and even peripheral figures maintain absolute silence when questioned by authorities. We had dozens of potential witnesses. One frustrated Holton Regional Police detective told local media months after the shooting. People who were in the restaurant, people who may have seen the shooter, people who knew Craig's movements that day. But almost no one would talk substantively. It was like hitting a brick wall. The effectiveness of this code is particularly evident in how quickly the investigation stalled. Despite the murder occurring in a busy public location with numerous witnesses, police struggled to develop actionable leads. The grey Honda Civic spotted near the scene was never located. Surveillance footage provided only vague descriptions of the shooter. Even Craig's known associates claimed to have no insights into why he might have been targeted. This wall of silence extends beyond direct Hells Angels members. Anyone connected to the club's extended network, from girlfriends and family members to business partners and even legitimate acquaintances, understands that cooperation with police can have severe consequences. The threat doesn't need to be stated explicitly. It's simply understood as an immutable rule of engagement with this world. It's not just fear of physical retribution, explains one academic who studies outlaw motorcycle gangs. It's a cultural norm. Cooperating with law enforcement makes you an outcast not just from the club, but from an entire social ecosystem. For many people, that's their whole world. The few people who spoke to police provided only the most basic information, carefully avoiding anything that might actually help solve the case. This calculated approach to providing minimal cooperation without actually assisting the investigation is a sophisticated tactic that outlaw motorcycle clubs have perfected over decades of law enforcement scrutiny. For investigators, breaking this code becomes the primary challenge in solving cases like Craig's murder. Without witnesses willing to come forward, without insiders providing context, and without anyone breaking ranks, even a public execution can remain unsolved indefinitely. This culture of silence doesn't just protect the specific individuals involved in Craig's murder, it protects the entire organizational structure and operational security of the club. The legacy, what his death reveals about modern organized crime.
A man in his 50s was gunned down last night in the parking lot of the Mandarin restaurant in Burlington. Police confirmed that the victim had just finished dining at the buffet before being shot outside.
The murder of Craig Truck McKilquam offers a rare window into the evolution of organized crime in Canada. Far from the stereotypical biker image of the 1970s and 80s, today's outlaw motorcycle clubs operate with sophisticated business models, international connections, and members who can seamlessly blend into suburban life while maintaining their criminal affiliations. This isn't Sons of Anarchy, explained one organized crime analyst. Modern outlaw motorcycle clubs are essentially multinational corporations with violent enforcement divisions. They have diversified revenue streams, risk management strategies, and members specifically selected for their ability to move between different worlds. Craig's double life exemplifies this evolution. His ability to maintain a quiet suburban existence while simultaneously operating within the Hells Angels reflects how the organization has adapted to increased law enforcement scrutiny. Rather than standing out, many members now focus on blending in, maintaining legitimate businesses, living in respectable neighborhoods, and saving their colors for club functions rather than daily wear. The professional nature of his execution also demonstrates the calculated approach modern criminal organizations take toward internal discipline or conflict resolution. This wasn't a bar fight gone wrong or an impulsive act of revenge. It was a carefully planned operation with clear objectives, precise execution, and a clean getaway. Such sophistication suggests an organization with resources, planning capabilities, and operational security protocols more commonly associated with intelligence agencies than street gangs. Craig's international connections reveal another aspect of modern organized crime: its global reach. The tributes from Switzerland, Denmark, and the Caribbean show how today's criminal networks transcend borders, leveraging technology and globalization just as legitimate businesses do. These aren't isolated local clubs, but interconnected organizations with global infrastructure. Perhaps most telling is how the investigation into Craig's murder stalled against the wall of silence. Despite significant advances in forensic technology, surveillance capabilities, and investigative techniques, law enforcement still struggles to penetrate organizations built on absolute loyalty and ruthless enforcement of internal rules. The code that protected the secrets of criminal organizations a century ago remains equally effective today. Craig McKilquam's story ended in that Burlington parking lot, but what his life and death reveal about the changing face of organized crime will continue to challenge law enforcement, fascinate the public, and influence how we understand the criminal underworld operating in plain sight within our communities. His murder remains officially unsolved, another cold case that demonstrates how effective the code of silence can be, even in an age where privacy seems increasingly impossible to maintain. The next time you pass a quiet suburban home or see a businessman in a coffee shop, remember Craig McKilquam. Behind the ordinary facade of everyday life, parallel worlds can exist. Worlds with their own rules, hierarchies, and consequences for those who step out of line. In the end, Craig's story isn't just about one man's murder. It's about the shadowy organizations that continue to evolve and operate despite society's best efforts to contain them. What happens when America's most violent biker gang turns on their own? The Hells Angels Sonoma County thought they were untouchable until their own brutality destroyed them. We're talking about 4.5 hours of torture, cold-blooded murder, and crimes so shocking that even the FBI called them the most violent of the dozens convicted. Today we're diving into how this feared criminal empire fell apart from the inside, leading to life sentences that ended their reign of terror forever. You won't believe what these criminals did to each other. The organization and structure of a criminal empire. To understand how the Hells Angels Sonoma County became such a powerful and dangerous criminal organization, we need to first examine how they were structured and organized. This wasn't a loose collection of motorcycle enthusiasts who occasionally broke the law or got into bar fights. This was a sophisticated criminal enterprise with a clear hierarchy, strict rules that were enforced through violence, and a systematic approach to intimidation and criminal activity that allowed them to operate for decades without serious interference from law enforcement. The Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, also known as Hells Angels or HAMC, is a globally recognized outlaw motorcycle gang with chapters operating across multiple continents. They are considered one of the 14 dominant outlaw motorcycle gangs in the United States, a designation that reflects both their size and their capacity for systematic criminal activity. The Hells Angels are part of the infamous 1% clubs, a name that comes from their belief that they represent the 1% of bikers who, as they put it, don't follow the rules, don't follow laws, and don't answer to anybody. This 1% designation isn't just a casual nickname or marketing slogan. It represents a fundamental philosophy that places the organization above the law and outside the bounds of civilized society. Members are expected to reject mainstream values, to view law enforcement as enemies to be destroyed, and to use violence whenever necessary to protect the organization's interests and maintain their reputation for brutality throughout the criminal underworld. The organization is structured into chapters known as charters, which operate regionally under the broader Hells Angels umbrella. In the United States, these charters are divided into West Coast and East Coast regions, creating a network that spans the entire country and allows for coordination of criminal activities across thousands of miles. While each charter retains a level of autonomy by establishing its own set of rules and adapting to local criminal opportunities, they must still abide by the collective guidelines known as the Hells Angels World Rules. These world rules aren't suggestions or guidelines that members can choose to follow or ignore based on their personal preferences or circumstances. They are enforced through systematic violence, and breaking them can result in severe punishment up to and including death. The world rules create a unified criminal organization that can coordinate activities across multiple states and regions while maintaining the local flexibility necessary to adapt to different criminal opportunities and varying levels of law enforcement pressure. Becoming a member of a Hells Angels charter is not a quick or easy process that someone can complete on a whim. It typically involves a carefully structured progression from being a hangaround to prospect for at least a year before attaining the status of a full patch member. Each stage of this progression involves increasingly serious criminal activities and repeated demonstrations of loyalty to the organization, ensuring that only the most committed and violent individuals join the ranks of full members. The hangaround stage is essentially a probationary period where individuals spend time with the club and prove their worthiness to become prospects. During this time, they're expected to show their commitment to the criminal lifestyle and their willingness to put the organization's interests above their own personal safety, legal concerns, or family relationships. Hangarounds have no official status within the organization and can be dismissed at any time without explanation or appeal. Prospects face much more serious requirements and must prove their loyalty through criminal activities that often include violence against rival gang members, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, witness intimidation, and other serious crimes that carry lengthy prison sentences. The prospect period is designed to test an individual's commitment to the criminal enterprise and their willingness to risk imprisonment or death for the organization. Only after successfully completing this dangerous apprenticeship can someone become a full patch member with the right to wear the organization's colors and participate in its decision-making processes. Full patch members are distinguished by the iconic three-piece patch on their vests, featuring the club's name, Hells Angels, at the top rocker. The center patch displays the Death Head logo, a skull with its mouth stitched shut, which has become one of the most recognizable symbols of organized crime in the world. Below the Death Head is the bottom rocker, indicating the state or region the member is from. Only full patch members are allowed to wear anything that displays the Hells Angels name or the Death Head logo, and protecting these symbols is considered a sacred duty that justifies any level of violence. Members can also earn additional tags that they wear on the front of their vest, with the most notorious being the Filthy Few tag. Members earn this designation by committing acts of violence in support of the club, including violence towards rival outlaw motorcycle gangs, members deemed to have disrespected fellow Hells Angels, those kicked out of the club in bad standing, and anyone who disrespects the patch in public. The Filthy Few patch serves as both a badge of honor within the organization and a warning to outsiders about that person's capacity for extreme violence. Each charter adheres to a standardized leadership structure that provides clear chains of command and responsibility, while ensuring that criminal activities can be coordinated effectively. This structure typically consists of roles such as president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and sergeant-at-arms. The president serves as the head of the charter and makes the final decisions on major criminal activities, while also serving as the primary representative to other charters and the national organization. The sergeant-at-arms acts as the enforcer, responsible for using violence when necessary to maintain respect for the charter and discipline charter members who fail to follow both charter-specific and world rules. Chapters hold mandatory weekly meetings referred to as church, where members discuss charter business and vote on charter issues ranging from criminal activities to internal discipline matters. These meetings operate on a one-man, one-vote principle, with most decisions made within the chapter being determined collectively through democratic processes. However, this democratic facade masks the reality that the most violent and influential members typically control the agenda and outcomes of these votes. Prospects are not allowed to participate in church meetings, demonstrating their lower status within the organization's rigid hierarchy. Instead, they are expected to provide security during these meetings, particularly by keeping an eye out for rival outlaw motorcycle gangs and law enforcement surveillance. This arrangement serves multiple purposes. It keeps sensitive criminal discussions away from newer members who might not be completely trustworthy, while also providing free security for the organization's leadership during their most vulnerable moments. During church meetings, it was very common for all Hells Angels Sonoma County members to share information about each other's criminal cases and potential criminal liabilities. The progress of members' criminal cases was closely monitored by the organization's leadership, who used this information to coordinate witness intimidation, plan retaliation against law enforcement, and ensure that members remained loyal even when facing serious criminal charges that could result in lengthy prison sentences. Key players in the criminal enterprise. Understanding the complete downfall of the Hells Angels, Sonoma County requires a detailed examination of the key individuals who built, led, and ultimately destroyed this violent criminal organization. These weren't just motorcycle enthusiasts who occasionally broke the law or got into fights at local bars. They were sophisticated criminals who built their reputations on systematic violence, calculated intimidation, and the ruthless exploitation of others. Their personalities, relationships, and criminal activities shaped the organization's culture and ultimately determined its fate. At the absolute center of the entire criminal enterprise stood Raymond Folks, known to everyone in the organization as Ray Ray. Raymond held the most important leadership positions within the Hells Angels Sonoma County, serving with distinction as both former president and former sergeant-at-arms. His influence extended far beyond any official title or position, making him the most respected, feared, and powerful figure in the organization's entire history. Raymond was president of the Hells Angels Sonoma County, at least until 2008, when he went to prison on federal charges, but his incarceration did nothing to diminish his power or influence within the organization. Even from behind bars, Raymond continued to call the shots and maintain significant influence within the chapter, demonstrating the organization's ability to continue criminal operations even when key leaders were imprisoned. Despite his incarceration, Raymond received moral and financial support from Hells Angels Sonoma County during his imprisonment, showing the organization's commitment to maintaining loyalty even when members were behind bars. Raymond's motorcycle was still proudly displayed at the clubhouse during his incarceration like a shrine to his authority, and he continued to actively participate in club activities by joining meetings from prison through smuggled cell phones and other communications methods. Raymond had built a reputation for being a badass, a rock star, and Mr. Hell's Angel among members throughout the organization and beyond. One member emphasized that nobody controlled Raymond, explaining that he had the highest level of respect and was highly admired throughout the criminal network. He was regarded as somebody extremely powerful within the club, even during his time behind bars, demonstrating that respect in the organization was based on capacity for violence and criminal achievement, rather than current freedom or legal status. The extent of Raymond's power and influence was captured perfectly in one member's statement. Whatever Ray Ray needed, Ray Ray got. And if that's because he was a member of Sonoma County or just a Hells Angel in general, that's Ray Ray, and Ray Ray gets what he wants. This wasn't just about personal charisma or individual relationships, but about Raymond's proven willingness to use extreme violence to achieve his goals and his track record of success in building the organization's power and reputation throughout the criminal underworld. Notably, Raymond's presence elevated the status of Hells Angels Sonoma County significantly because he was known and respected among other Hells Angels chapters throughout the country. His reputation gave the local chapter access to criminal opportunities, protection, and resources that they wouldn't have had otherwise, making him invaluable to the organization's continued success and expansion into new criminal markets. Russell Ott, known throughout the organization by the moniker Chief, represented the organizational memory and founding vision of the criminal enterprise. As a founding member of Hells Angels Sonoma County and its president for 15 years before Raymond Folks took over, Russell had been present for the organization's entire transformation from a simple motorcycle club into a sophisticated criminal organization capable of coordinating complex illegal activities across multiple states and regions. Russell was described as one of the most active Hells Angels ever, often spending extensive periods of time at the Hells Angels Sonoma County Clubhouse and even living there during certain periods when the organization faced external threats or needed constant coordination of criminal activities. This constant presence made him a central figure in the organization's day-to-day operations and criminal planning, while his deep knowledge of the organization's history, rules, and relationships made him an invaluable resource for newer members and a key figure in maintaining the organization's criminal traditions and institutional memory. Christopher Ranieri, a former president of the Boston Hells Angels chapter, maintained extraordinarily strong ties with both the Hells Angels Sonoma County and Fresno chapters, creating a criminal network that spanned the entire continent and allowed for coordination of complex criminal activities across thousands of miles. His influence and connections were demonstrated by the celebrations that were held for Christopher when he visited both West Coast clubhouses, showing the respect and fear he commanded throughout the organization. The depth of Christopher's connection to the West Coast chapters was revealed through his personal relationships with their members and his emotional investment in their success. The Hells Angels Sonoma County Sergeant-at-Arms, Russell Lyles, visited Christopher frequently and even considered naming his son after him, showing how personal relationships and criminal business interests intersected within the organization. Christopher wore a Sonoma tag and had a Sonoma County Death's Head tattoo on his forearm, demonstrating his deep emotional and criminal investment in the West Coast operations. These personal connections weren't just about friendship or mutual respect between individuals who happened to share similar interests. They were the foundation of criminal conspiracies that would span thousands of miles and involve coordination between different criminal organizations, ultimately bringing federal law enforcement into the picture and dramatically increasing the potential penalties for everyone involved in the criminal enterprise. Jonathan Nelson, the most recent president of Hells Angels Sonoma County, was highly respected throughout the organization, but his respect was based on fear rather than admiration or genuine leadership qualities. He often used violence to address perceived slights against himself and the Hells Angels Sonoma County, creating a climate of terror that extended far beyond the organization to affect the broader community and innocent civilians who had no connection to criminal activities. Jonathan had developed significant respect and a close personal friendship with Christopher Ranieri, giving him access to the East Coast criminal network and elevating his status within the broader Hells Angels organization. This relationship was crucial to Jonathan's authority within the organization because it demonstrated his connections to powerful figures in the national criminal network and his ability to coordinate activities across multiple states and regions. Jonathan's leadership style was characterized by extreme sensitivity about his status and authority within the organization. He couldn't tolerate any challenge to his position, whether real or perceived, and he was quick to respond with extreme violence to any perceived disrespect or challenge to his authority. This volatile and dangerous personality made him both an effective enforcer of the organization's criminal activities and a liability who attracted unwanted law enforcement attention through his excessive and poorly controlled use of violence. Brian Wendt, former president of the Hells Angels Fresno chapter and the Hells Angels West Coast Sergeant-at-Arms, was known throughout the criminal network for using extreme violence in carrying out his role as regional enforcer and coordinator of criminal activities. Brian had developed a close personal bond with Jonathan Nelson that created a powerful partnership between the Sonoma County and Fresno chapters, facilitating major criminal enterprises including drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, and ultimately murder. Brian was present at the Hells Angels Sonoma County Clubhouse frequently, demonstrating how the organization's leadership moved freely between different chapters to coordinate their criminal activities and maintain unified control over their territory and criminal operations. His role as West Coast Sergeant-at-Arms made him one of the most feared and powerful enforcers in the entire organization, responsible for maintaining discipline and coordinating violent activities throughout the western United States. Joel Silver was a member of Hells Angels Sonoma County, who had built a reputation as a bully, causing serious problems at the Sonoma County, Fresno, and New Hampshire clubhouses through his inability to control his violent impulses and respect the organization's hierarchy. Joel's behavior was creating tensions not just within his own chapter, but throughout the broader Hells Angels network, threatening the carefully maintained relationships that were crucial for the organization's criminal success. The culture of violence and systematic intimidation. The Hells Angels Sonoma County didn't simply use violence as one tool among many for achieving their criminal goals and maintaining their position in the underworld. They built their entire organizational identity and operational philosophy around the systematic, calculated use of violence and intimidation. This culture of brutality wasn't an accident, a side effect of their criminal activities, or something that developed gradually over time. It was a deliberately cultivated and carefully maintained system that served multiple crucial purposes within their criminal enterprise and defined their reputation throughout the criminal underworld. Violence within the organization served as the ultimate form of communication and problem-solving, transcending language barriers and cultural differences within their diverse membership, while ensuring that everyone understood the consequences of crossing the organization or challenging its authority. When words failed, when negotiations broke down, or when the organization's authority was challenged by internal dissent or external threats, violence provided a clear, immediate, and universally understood solution that left no room for misinterpretation or future challenges to the organization's power structure. This wasn't random brutality, uncontrolled aggression, or violence committed in the heat of passion by individuals who had lost their tempers. It was calculated violence designed to send specific messages to specific audiences while achieving concrete criminal objectives and maintaining the organization's reputation for absolute ruthlessness. Internal violence was used to maintain strict discipline and ensure that all members understood the severe consequences of disloyalty, disobedience, or any challenge to the organization's hierarchy and authority structure. The organization's commitment to violence was so complete and fundamental that it became the primary measure of a member's worth, status, and potential for advancement within the criminal enterprise. Members who were willing to commit acts of violence in support of the club could earn the prestigious Filthy Few tag, which served simultaneously as a badge of honor within the organization and a clear warning to outsiders about that person's capacity for brutal, unrestrained violence against anyone who crossed them. This system created powerful incentives for members to actively seek out opportunities for violence, knowing that their willingness to hurt, maim, or kill others would be rewarded with higher status, greater respect from their criminal associates, better criminal opportunities, and increased protection from the organization. The Filthy Few designation wasn't just about recognizing past violence, but about demonstrating ongoing commitment to using brutality whenever the organization demanded it, regardless of the personal risks or legal consequences. Rival outlaw motorcycle gangs were viewed as natural enemies by Hells Angels members, not competitors in the same criminal markets or even adversaries in a traditional sense, but as threats to be systematically eliminated through coordinated campaigns of violence and intimidation. Members were expected to attack enemies on sight whenever they encountered them, regardless of the circumstances, location, or potential witnesses who might observe the violence. Government witness Joseph Hardesty revealed during his testimony that he was recruited by the Hells Angels for what they called big game hunting and small game hunting, terminology that revealed how completely the organization had dehumanized their enemies and reduced fellow human beings to prey to be systematically hunted and eliminated. This referred to the task of hunting and killing the Mongols, which they considered big game, and hunting and killing the Vagos, which they considered small game. This hunting metaphor wasn't just casual language or dark humor used by criminals to describe their activities, but reflected a fundamental worldview that divided humanity into predators and prey, with the Hells Angels viewing themselves as apex predators, with the natural right and responsibility to eliminate anyone who challenged their dominance in the criminal ecosystem. Joseph recounted a chilling incident that demonstrated how completely the organization had normalized extreme violence and conditioned its members to commit potentially lethal acts without hesitation or moral consideration. He was riding with Hells Angels Sonoma County members, including Joel Silver and Russell Ott, when he spotted an individual whom he believed to be a member of a rival outlaw motorcycle gang, based solely on appearance and location. Without any attempt to verify the person's identity, determine their intentions, or consider the potential legal consequences of his actions, Joseph immediately took out his gun and fired multiple shots in the person's direction, potentially committing attempted murder based solely on the belief that the target was associated with a rival organization. This hair-trigger response to perceived enemies showed how the organization had conditioned its members to view lethal violence not as a last resort to be used only when absolutely necessary, but as the appropriate first response to any potential threat or challenge. Following the shooting, rather than being concerned about this random act of potentially lethal violence or worried about the legal consequences of attempted murder in a public location, the other Hells Angels Sonoma County members present commended Joseph's actions and praised him for his willingness to use violence, hailing him as a real Hells Angel. This response revealed how completely the organization's value system had been inverted from mainstream society, where violence against perceived enemies wasn't just acceptable, but was actively celebrated and used as a primary measure of a member's worth and commitment to the criminal enterprise. After a Mongols member killed the president of the San Francisco Hells Angels, in what the organization viewed as an unacceptable challenge to their authority and dominance, Hells Angels Sonoma County members were instructed to actively look out for Mongols throughout their territory and attack them on sight whenever they were encountered, regardless of the circumstances or potential consequences. This directive wasn't just a general call for increased vigilance or a suggestion that members should be prepared to defend themselves if attacked, but a systematic campaign of violence designed to terrorize an entire rival organization through coordinated attacks. Failure to comply with this directive resulted in immediate and severe loss of status within the Hells Angels organization, demonstrating how seriously the leadership took their campaign of systematic violence against rival groups. For example, a full-patch Hells Angels Sonoma County member failed to report seeing a Mongol license plate within what the organization considered to be Hells Angels territory, and was immediately demoted to prospect status as punishment for this failure to participate in the organization's violent activities. This harsh punishment for what might seem like a relatively minor oversight demonstrated how seriously the organization took their campaign of violence and how any failure to actively participate in violent activities against rival groups was considered a fundamental betrayal of the organization's core values and mission. The brutal assault of Troy Conte.
Troy Conte, a former member of Hells Angels Sonoma County, was sleeping with Raymond Folks' girlfriend. In November 2016, after Raymond found out about the affair, Troy received a text message stating that all Hells Angels Sonoma County members needed to be at the clubhouse for a meeting. Members of the club were already there, and 20 minutes after Troy got there, Raymond arrived and confronted him about the affair. Raymond struck Troy in the face. Despite attempts to leave, Troy was dragged back inside by Raymond and Russell out, and the assault continued. Eventually, the assault stopped for a bit so that Hells Angels Sonoma County members could vote on Troy's membership within the club. After they voted to revoke his membership, the beating continued. Troy endured a brutal beating that involved being hit with a baseball bat, being bullwhipped and pistol whipped over the course of 4.5 hours. Troy was also held down so Raymond could run a tattoo gun across his face. Raymond left amidst the assault and came back later. Troy said that the worst part of the assault was when Jonathan Nelson pistol whipped him in the face. The night Troy was brutally assaulted and removed from Hells Angels Sonoma County, Raymond left amidst the assault in order to sexually assault Troy's wife Michelle in a disturbing act of intimidation. Amid the violence at the clubhouse, Raymond called Michelle and told her to come to the clubhouse. Once she arrived, Raymond took her to a secluded area. He told her if she doesn't do what he says, Troy is going to get worse than what he already has, and if she says anything to anybody, then he'll come after her. Raymond then forced Michelle to perform fellatio on him before she returned home. Following this, Raymond returned to the clubhouse to continue the assault on Troy, callously recounting what he did to Michelle. Prior to Troy's return home, Raymond went to their house and attempted to assault Michelle again in their bed. However, Hells Angels Sonoma County member Josh Johnson, who was bringing Troy home after the assault at the clubhouse, arrived at the house before Raymond could follow through with the sexual assault and persuaded Raymond to leave. Michelle then rushed her injured husband to the hospital. After the brutal assault, Troy required an overnight stay in the hospital due to the severity of his injuries. Medical records described Troy as a risk for sudden clinical deterioration and life-threatening injuries. Medical records showed that he suffered facial fractures, including those affecting the orbital walls of his left eye. He also needed plastic surgery to remove the tattoos from his forehead after Raymond ran a tattoo gun over his face. Even to this day, Troy still has vision issues stemming from the incident. The day following the assault, Michelle disclosed to her husband that she had been sexually assaulted by Raymond. Despite usually avoiding dealing with law enforcement, Troy encouraged Michelle to report the assault to the police, a typically forbidden thing to do by a member or associate of the Hells Angels. Michelle followed through with Troy's advice, leading to Raymond's subsequent arrest.
The savage, hours-long assault of Troy Conte represented the Hells Angels Sonoma County's culture of systematic violence at its most personal, calculated, and brutal. This wasn't just another act of criminal violence, a spontaneous fight between individuals with personal grievances, or even a typical example of gang brutality. This was a carefully orchestrated torture session designed to punish what the organization considered the ultimate betrayal, while simultaneously demonstrating their absolute power over anyone who dared to cross them or challenge their authority. The 4.5-hour ordeal that Troy endured would become one of the most compelling and horrifying pieces of evidence in the federal prosecution that would ultimately destroy the entire criminal organization, providing prosecutors with detailed testimony about the organization's methods, leadership structure, and complete willingness to use extreme torture to maintain control and discipline among their members and associates. Troy Conte, a former member of Hells Angels Sonoma County who had once been trusted with the organization's secrets and included in their criminal activities, was discovered to be sleeping with Raymond Folk's girlfriend. In the violent and rigidly hierarchical world of the Hells Angels, this wasn't just a personal matter between individuals or a private relationship issue that could be resolved through discussion, negotiation, or mutual agreement between the parties involved. The affair represented a direct challenge to Raymond's authority, status, and reputation within the organization, an insult that demanded not just punishment, but a brutal public demonstration of power that would serve as a clear warning to anyone else who might consider crossing the organization's leadership or challenging the established hierarchy. The discovery of this betrayal set in motion a series of events that would reveal the cold, calculated nature of the organization's approach to internal discipline and their sophisticated understanding of psychological torture techniques. In November 2016, after Raymond discovered the affair and had sufficient time to plan his response and coordinate with other members of the organization's leadership, Troy received what appeared to be a routine text message that gave no indication of the horror that awaited him. The message stated that all Hells Angels Sonoma County members needed to be at the clubhouse for a mandatory meeting, the kind of gathering that happened regularly for organizational business and criminal planning purposes. For Troy, who apparently had no idea that his affair had been discovered or that he was walking into a carefully planned trap designed to destroy him, this seemed like just another routine gathering of the organization's membership. He had no way of knowing that this seemingly innocuous message was actually his death warrant, summoning him to face judgment and punishment for his betrayal in front of the entire organization. When Troy arrived at the clubhouse, he walked directly into a carefully orchestrated and meticulously planned trap that had been designed to maximize his suffering while demonstrating the organization's power to other members. Other members of the club were already gathered and waiting, fully aware of what was about to happen and eager to witness what they knew would be a violent demonstration of the organization's capacity for brutality and the severe consequences of crossing their leadership. Members of the club were already there, and 20 minutes after Troy arrived, giving him just enough time to realize that something was seriously wrong and to experience the growing fear and anxiety that would enhance his psychological suffering, Raymond arrived and immediately confronted him about the affair. There was no discussion, no opportunity for explanation, apology, or negotiation of any kind. Without any warning or preamble, Raymond struck Troy in the face with tremendous force, beginning what would become one of the most savage and prolonged displays of organized violence in the organization's brutal history. Despite desperate attempts to leave the clubhouse and escape the violence that was clearly planned for him, Troy was dragged back inside by Raymond and Russell Ott, demonstrating that this wasn't just Raymond's personal revenge, but a coordinated organizational effort supported by other leaders of the criminal enterprise. The participation of multiple senior members in preventing Troy's escape showed that this torture session had the official sanction and active support of the organization's leadership. Eventually, the ongoing physical assault was temporarily suspended so that Hells Angels Sonoma County members could hold a formal vote on Troy's membership within the club, creating a grotesque parody of democratic decision-making that overlaid the systematic torture and added an additional layer of psychological trauma to the physical violence. This wasn't just about inflicting physical pain and injury on Troy, but about maximizing his psychological suffering through a carefully orchestrated process of humiliation and degradation. After they voted to revoke his membership, permanently expelling him from the organization and stripping him of any protection or consideration he might have expected from his former associates, the beating continued with renewed intensity and systematic brutality. Troy endured a brutal beating that involved being hit with a baseball bat, being bull-whipped with various implements, and being pistol-whipped by multiple members over the course of 4.5 hours of continuous violence. Troy was also held down so Raymond could run a tattoo gun across his face, permanently marking him as a traitor and ensuring that he would carry the physical scars of this experience for the rest of his life. This act of forced tattooing revealed the psychological sophistication of the organization's torture methods, which were designed to inflict not just immediate physical pain, but lasting humiliation, trauma, and permanent disfigurement that would serve as a constant reminder of what happened to people who crossed the organization. During the assault, Raymond left amidst the torture and came back later, a detail that would prove crucial to understanding the full scope of the organization's campaign of violence and intimidation against Troy and his family. Troy said that the worst part of the assault was when Jonathan Nelson, the organization's current president, pistol-whipped him in the face, demonstrating how the organization's highest-ranking leader felt the need to participate directly and personally in the violence. After the brutal assault, Troy required an overnight stay in the hospital due to the severity of his injuries, with medical records describing him as a risk for sudden clinical deterioration and life-threatening injuries. Medical records showed that he suffered facial fractures, including those affecting the orbital walls of his left eye, and he needed plastic surgery to remove the tattoos from his forehead after Raymond ran a tattoo gun over his face. Even to this day, Troy still has vision issues stemming from the incident, showing the permanent damage caused by the organization's systematic torture. The sexual assault and intimidation of Michelle.
Even to this day, Troy still has vision issues stemming from the incident. The day following the assault, Michelle disclosed to her husband that she had been sexually assaulted by Raymond. Despite usually avoiding dealing with law enforcement, Troy encouraged Michelle to report the assault to the police, a typically forbidden thing to do by a member or associate of the Hells Angels. Michelle followed through with Troy's advice, leading to Raymond's subsequent arrest.
While Troy Conti endured systematic torture and brutalization at the clubhouse, his wife Michelle became the victim of a calculated sexual assault that demonstrated the Hells Angels Sonoma County's willingness to target completely innocent family members as part of their comprehensive campaign of violence and intimidation. This aspect of the organization's criminal activities revealed their understanding that psychological warfare could be just as effective as physical violence in destroying their enemies and maintaining control over anyone who might challenge their authority. The night Troy was brutally assaulted and removed from Hells Angels Sonoma County, Raymond left amidst the assault in order to sexually assault Troy's wife Michelle in a disturbing act of intimidation that was designed to maximize Troy's psychological suffering while demonstrating the organization's complete power over anyone who crossed them. This wasn't a spontaneous act of sexual violence or an opportunistic crime committed in the heat of the moment, but a calculated and strategic decision designed to inflict maximum psychological damage on the organization's primary target. Amid the ongoing violence at the clubhouse, with multiple members participating in Troy's systematic torture, Raymond made the deliberate decision to temporarily abandon the physical assault and focus his attention on Troy's wife. He called Michelle and told her to come to the clubhouse, using her natural concern for her husband's safety as a weapon that could be turned against both of them. Michelle, having no way of knowing what Raymond intended to do to her, and probably being primarily concerned about Troy's safety and well-being, after receiving such an ominous summons, felt compelled to respond to this demand from such a powerful and feared figure within the organization. Her decision to comply with Raymond's order showed how the organization exploited people's love and concern for family members as tools that could be used to facilitate additional crimes. Once she arrived at the clubhouse, Raymond took her to a secluded area away from the ongoing assault, showing his careful planning and understanding that what he was about to do needed to be conducted away from potential witnesses who might later testify about his specific actions. This level of premeditation and tactical thinking demonstrates that the sexual assault wasn't an impulsive act, driven by opportunity or sexual desire, but a deliberate crime designed to achieve specific objectives within the organization's broader campaign of intimidation and punishment. Raymond told Michelle that if she didn't do what he said, Troy was going to get worse than what he already had, and if she said anything to anybody about what happened, then he would come after her personally. These threats created a psychologically devastating situation where Michelle had no good options available to her and was forced to choose between terrible alternatives that would result in suffering regardless of her decision. She could either submit to Raymond's sexual demands, knowing that compliance would spare Troy additional suffering, but would subject her to sexual assault and ongoing trauma, or she could resist and fight back, knowing that her defiance would likely result in even more brutal treatment for her husband, who was already being systematically tortured by multiple attackers in the next room. Raymond then forced Michelle to perform fellatio on him before she returned home, committing a sexual assault that served multiple purposes within the organization's criminal strategy and demonstrated his complete contempt for both his victims and basic human decency. The assault was designed not just to satisfy Raymond's personal sexual desires, but to demonstrate his complete power over Troy and his family, showing that he could take anything he wanted from them, including his wife's dignity and bodily autonomy. The sexual nature of the assault added an additional layer of humiliation, trauma, and psychological damage that would affect both Michelle and Troy for the rest of their lives, creating lasting emotional scars that would persist long after the physical wounds had healed. Raymond understood that sexual assault carries a particular stigma and creates specific forms of trauma that would make it even more difficult for the victims to report the crime or discuss it with others, potentially keeping his actions hidden while maximizing the long-term psychological damage to both targets. Following this sexual assault, Raymond returned to the clubhouse to continue the assault on Troy, callously recounting what he had done to Michelle in front of the other members who were participating in or witnessing the ongoing torture session. This wasn't just bragging about a criminal act or sharing details of his sexual conquest with his criminal associates, but a calculated demonstration to the other members of the organization that Raymond had the power, authority, and complete lack of moral restraints necessary to commit any crime he wanted against their enemies. Prior to Troy's return home from the hospital, Raymond went to their house and attempted to assault Michelle again in their bed, showing his belief that he could commit any crime he wanted against Troy's family without facing any consequences from law enforcement or retaliation from his victims. However, Hells Angels Sonoma County member Josh Johnson, who was bringing Troy home after the assault at the clubhouse, arrived at the house before Raymond could follow through with the second sexual assault and persuaded Raymond to leave. The day following the assault, Michelle disclosed to her husband that she had been sexually assaulted by Raymond, adding another devastating layer of trauma to an already horrific situation and ensuring that Troy would have to live with the knowledge that his personal betrayal had resulted in his wife being victimized by the same man who had tortured him. Despite usually avoiding any contact with law enforcement, which was typically a forbidden thing to do for any member or associate of the Hells Angels, Troy encouraged Michelle to report the assault to the police. Michelle followed through with Troy's advice, leading to Raymond's subsequent arrest and marking the beginning of the organization's downfall as their code of silence was finally broken. The murder of Joel Silva and its execution.
Joel Silva held the position of sergeant-at-arms in the club and had been a member for 5 years when he met his tragic end. During June 2014, Joel attended the annual Laconia Motorcycle Week in New Hampshire alongside fellow members Joseph Hardesty, as well as charter members Brian Wendt, Robbie Huff, and Tio Bueno from the Fresno chapter. While at the event, Joel and Joseph spent time at the Laconia Charter Clubhouse, where they were reckless and causing problems. Joseph stated that they were using meth, tearing the clubhouse apart, terrorizing the prospects, and picking on all the East Coast members. Joel engaged in this type of behavior very often, which was causing tensions between him and the Hells Angels. At one point, a conflict arose between Joel and Boston Charter member Sweeney, who was the right-hand man to Boston Charter President Christopher Ranieri. Sweeney was upset with Joel for moving marijuana across the country, while Joel was upset and jealous that Sweeney had taken a Hells Angels chain from him and given it to Joseph.
The calculated, cold-blooded murder of Joel Silver represented the ultimate expression of the Hells Angels Sonoma County's willingness to eliminate anyone they viewed as a threat to their criminal enterprise, even when that threat came from within their own ranks and involved killing someone they had once considered a brother. This wasn't a crime of passion, a spontaneous act of violence during a heated argument, or the result of a personal dispute between individual members with long-standing grievances. Joel Silver held the position of Sergeant-at-Arms in the club and had been a member for 5 years when he met his tragic end, a length of service that should have earned him respect and protection from his criminal associates. As someone responsible for internal discipline and enforcement within the organization, Joel was expected to be one of the most trusted and valued figures within the chapter's hierarchy and power structure. However, over the course of his membership, Joel had developed a reputation as an out-of-control bully whose violent behavior was creating serious problems not just within his own chapter, but throughout the broader Hells Angels network, and threatening the organization's carefully maintained relationships with allied criminal groups. Joel was known for his reputation as a bully, causing problems at the Sonoma County, Fresno, and New Hampshire clubhouses through his inability to control his violent impulses or respect the organization's established hierarchy and rules. During June 2014, Joel attended the annual Laconia Motorcycle Week in New Hampshire alongside fellow members Joseph Hardesty, as well as charter members Brian Wendt, Robbie Huff, and Tio Bueno from the allied Fresno chapter. What should have been an opportunity to strengthen relationships with East Coast chapters and conduct productive criminal business instead became a complete disaster that would ultimately mark Joel for death and set in motion the events that would lead to his murder. While at the event, Joel and Joseph spent considerable time at the Laconia Charter Clubhouse, where their behavior was so reckless and disruptive that it shocked even other members of the notoriously violent organization and created serious tensions with their East Coast allies. Joseph later testified that they were using methamphetamine extensively, which contributed to their complete loss of control and inappropriate behavior throughout the event. They spent their time tearing the clubhouse apart, terrorizing the prospects who were supposed to be protected and guided by full members, and picking on all the East Coast members who were their hosts and should have been treated with respect and courtesy. Joel engaged in this type of behavior very often, which was causing ongoing tensions between him and the broader Hells Angels organization and threatening the stability of the entire criminal network. At one point during the Laconia event, a serious conflict arose between Joel and Boston Charter member Sweeney, who served as the right-hand man to Boston Charter President Christopher Ranieri, and was therefore one of the most powerful and influential figures in the entire East Coast criminal network. This confrontation involved both business and personal elements that revealed the complex dynamics within the criminal organization and showed how individual grievances could escalate into existential threats to the entire network. Sweeney was upset with Joel for moving marijuana across the country without proper authorization from the appropriate leadership, a serious violation of the organization's territorial rules and chain of command that could have attracted federal law enforcement attention and interfered with other members' established drug trafficking operations. Meanwhile, Joel was angry and jealous that Sweeney had taken a Hells Angels chain from him and given it to Joseph, an action that Joel viewed as a personal insult and direct challenge to his status within the organization. The situation escalated dramatically when Joel directly threatened Sweeney and openly stated that he wanted to kill him, actively seeking help from Joseph and Robbie in carrying out this murder. This threat was recognized immediately as a significant problem that could destroy the entire organization through internal warfare. Joseph tried to talk Joel out of this catastrophic course of action, telling him directly that you can't kill other Hell's Angels, and pointing out that he was talking about killing a member over a chain, just because your feelings are hurt. When the news of Joel's threat eventually reached Brian Wendt, he was very upset and immediately told Christopher about the situation, setting in motion the chain of events that would lead to Joel's death. The Fresno Charter gave Joseph an ultimatum, telling him that he would have to choose between supporting Joel or aligning himself with the more powerful Fresno Charter. You're going to stay here with Joel, or you're coming with us. Pick a side. Joseph ultimately opted to align himself with the Fresno Charter, recognizing that they were more powerful and that staying with Joel would likely result in his own death. As Joseph later explained, if I stayed with Joel, that meant I was going to face the same fate as him. He also believed that Joel had made a big mistake, and it wasn't the safe choice to stay with him, showing how members constantly calculated their survival based on shifting power dynamics within the organization. Subsequently, Joseph went with the Fresno Charter to Christopher's home in Boston, where Christopher and Brian had a private discussion regarding Joel's threat and the appropriate response to this challenge to their authority. Upon rejoining the group after their confidential meeting, Christopher and Brian announced their decision with chilling simplicity. Joel had to go. This wasn't an emotional decision made in the heat of anger, but a calculated business decision made by the organization's most powerful leaders after careful consideration of the threat Joel represented. The following day, at Joseph's home in Antioch, California, a formal planning meeting took place among Hell's Angels Sonoma County, President Jonathan, Brian, and several members of the Fresno Charter to discuss the specifics of killing Joel and coordinate the logistics of the murder. After thorough discussion, they ultimately decided to proceed with the plan to eliminate Joel permanently. Their reasoning revealed the cold, businesslike approach the organization took to internal violence and the elimination of problematic members. They decided to kill Joel because he was causing too much problems, beating too many friends up. The threat to Sweeney's life, he was causing too much drama within different charters. This wasn't about justice, honor, or protecting innocent people, but about eliminating a disruptive employee who was interfering with the smooth operation of their criminal business. Jonathan also had personal motivations for supporting Joel's murder that revealed additional layers of the organization's internal politics and power struggles. Jonathan perceived that Joel was challenging his status as Hell's Angels Sonoma County president, dating back to a confrontation in February 2013 when Joel had struck Jonathan in the forehead, an act of disrespect that Jonathan had never forgotten or forgiven. Jonathan was extremely sensitive about his status as president and couldn't tolerate any challenge to his authority or position within the organization. In the summer of 2014, Jonathan had complained that he had problems with Joel, specifically that he didn't like the way Joel was bad-mouthing him, and that Joel went back east and said some stuff about him about being president. These perceived slights had been festering for months, and the Laconia incident provided the perfect justification for eliminating someone Jonathan viewed as a personal threat to his leadership. The investigation, trials, and ultimate justice. The sophisticated murder of Joel Silver, combined with the brutal assault of Troy Conte and the sexual assault of Michelle, provided federal law enforcement with the evidence they needed to launch one of the most comprehensive and successful organized crime investigations in recent history. The investigation that followed demonstrated how modern law enforcement techniques, when combined with the courage of victims and witnesses, could penetrate even the most secretive criminal organizations and hold their leaders accountable for decades of violence and intimidation. The investigation began with the extraordinary courage of Troy Conte and his wife Michelle, who made the critical and dangerous decision to report their brutal victimization to law enforcement. Despite knowing full well the obvious and potentially lethal danger this cooperation posed to their safety and the safety of their family members. Troy's decision to seek medical treatment for his severe injuries and Michelle's decision to report her sexual assault provided investigators with their first real window into the organization's criminal activities and systematic methods of operation. These initial reports weren't just isolated incidents of violence that could be dismissed as personal disputes or random criminal activity unconnected to organized crime. They revealed a clear pattern of systematic criminal behavior that extended throughout the organization's membership and across multiple states, suggesting the existence of a sophisticated criminal enterprise rather than just a motorcycle club that occasionally engaged in illegal activities or individual members who committed crimes independently. The development of confidential informants proved absolutely crucial to the investigation's ultimate success, as these insider witnesses could provide detailed information about the organization's structure, ongoing criminal activities, and specific crimes that would have been impossible to obtain through traditional law enforcement techniques alone. Steve Verhagen, a former prospect who had witnessed many of the organization's crimes and participated in their violent culture, made the courageous decision to cooperate with federal authorities and provide detailed testimony about what he had seen and experienced during his time with the organization. Even more significant was Joseph Hardisty's decision to become a government witness, a choice that required extraordinary courage given his direct involvement in planning Joel Silver's murder and his detailed knowledge of the organization's most serious crimes. Joseph's testimony would prove crucial in establishing the interstate nature of the criminal conspiracy, the involvement of multiple chapter leaders in ordering and coordinating the murder, and the sophisticated methods the organization used to plan and cover up their most serious crimes. The investigation also benefited tremendously from advances in digital forensics and communications analysis that allowed investigators to track the movements and communications of key suspects during critical periods of criminal activity. Cell phone records proved absolutely crucial in establishing the timeline of Joel Silver's murder, the movements of the people involved in planning and carrying out his death, and the coordination between different chapters that made the crime possible. Cell phone data from July 16, 2014, the day after Joel's disappearance, showed that Fresno Charter member Merle Hefferman got in touch with Levi Phipps, the manager of California Crematory, linked to Yoston Webb Funeral Home in Fresno. Merle texted Levi, "You better be there," a communication that would prove to be crucial evidence of the organization's use of legitimate businesses to support their criminal activities and dispose of evidence. After receiving the message, two men arrived at the crematorium, and they brandished a gun at Levi, forcing him to participate in the disposal of Joel's body. They moved what appeared to be a body from their vehicle to the crematory incinerator, and then arranged for another body to be cremated to provide cover for their criminal activities. Cell site data also placed key suspects near the location where Joel's burnt-out truck was discovered on fire in a remote area, creating a digital trail that corroborated witness testimony about the murder and cover-up. On June 22, 2022, after hearing extensive testimony about the organization's structure, criminal activities, and specific violent crimes, a federal jury found Jonathan Nelson, Russell Ott, and Brian Wendt guilty of conspiracy under RICO, as well as conspiracy to commit murder under the Violent Crimes in Aid of Racketeering Activity and murder under VICAR. In addition to these primary charges, Jonathan Nelson received additional convictions for assault with a dangerous weapon to aid racketeering and use of a firearm during a crime of violence, reflecting his direct participation in the brutal torture of Troy Conte. All three defendants were ultimately sentenced to life in prison, representing the maximum penalty available under federal law and effectively ensuring that they would spend the remainder of their lives in federal custody, unable to direct or participate in any future criminal activities or rebuild the criminal network they had spent decades constructing and maintaining. On May 17, 2023, a second federal jury rendered guilty verdicts against Raymond Folks and Christopher Ranieri, two of the most powerful figures in the broader Hells Angels criminal network, whose convictions demonstrated that the federal investigation had successfully reached beyond the local Sonoma County chapter to target the regional and national leadership of the criminal organization. Raymond Folks faced additional convictions for assault with a dangerous weapon in support of racketeering, relating to his leading role in the systematic torture of Troy Conte, and witness tampering, reflecting his sexual assault of Michelle Conte and his calculated attempts to intimidate her into not cooperating with law enforcement. Christopher Ranieri was found guilty of conspiring to commit murder as per the Violent Crimes in Aid of Racketeering Activity, establishing his role in authorizing and directing the murder of Joel Silver from his position as Boston chapter president. At the time of this account, both Raymond Folks and Christopher Ranieri were still awaiting their sentences. but the statutory maximum penalties they faced reflected the severity of their convictions. Christopher Ranieri faced a statutory maximum prison term of life, while Raymond Folks faced a statutory maximum prison term of 60 years, sentences that would effectively mean life imprisonment for both men given their ages and the nature of their crimes. Several other organization members chose to cooperate with prosecutors rather than face trial and potential life sentences. Merle Hefferman pleaded guilty for his part in the violent crimes as part of the racketeering conspiracy and was sentenced to 48 months in prison on October 19, 2023. Russell Lyles pleaded guilty to involvement in a racketeering conspiracy and assault and was sentenced to 63 months in federal prison. Damian Cesena pleaded guilty for his part in the violent murder and was sentenced to 52 months in prison.